By the way, I got vaccinated last week, and hopefully the rest of you, all of you will soon. So maybe someday we can get together and do this in person again. That would be great. And then go out for our favorite beverage afterwards in celebration. So we intend to conduct this meeting similar to in-person meetings. Commissioners, please remain on camera just as you would be visible during in-person meetings. Also mute your microphone when not speaking. Public comment will be via telephone. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call one of the following toll-free numbers: 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247, and enter the meeting ID 913-5783-4502. And by the way, these numbers will remain the same for the entire year for Energy Commission meetings. So this information, along with 2 local dial-in numbers, is also available on the published agenda, in the public notice section of the city website, and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 9, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. So opening up or going into our agenda, the first thing on the agenda is the land acknowledgement. Missy, will you please recite the land acknowledgement?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Mirsky. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from Indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you, Missy. By the way, I just listened to a podcast today from Vancouver, Washington, or Vancouver, British Columbia, and they read a similar land acknowledgement at the beginning of their podcast, which I thought was very cool. So could you lead us through the roll call?
Absolutely. Let me pull that up here. Great. Commissioner Hookham.
He's here.
Yes. Commissioner McComber.
I'm here.
You're here. Great. Commissioner Schreiber.
Here.
Commissioner Clevey.
Here.
Great. Commissioner Levin.
Here.
Chair Mirsky.
Here.
Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Briggs.
Here.
Councilmember Radina.
Here.
Commissioner Zucker.
Here.
Commissioner Hatcher.
Here.
Commissioner McCoy.
Here.
Commissioner George.
Here.
Commissioner Singleton. Commissioner Kerber.
Here.
You have a beautiful quorum.
Excellent. So next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Hope everybody's had a chance to look at it. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda as published?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, so all in favor say aye, or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
I can't see everybody, so if
Aye.
any opposed, I'll go on the opposed. No opposed. So the next is approval of the minutes. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to take a look at the minutes. Again, they're always posted with the last meeting. So does anybody have, or would anybody be willing to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Commissioner
So
Hall, I
moved.
believe, raised his hand.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor then? Say aye.
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 Any opposed? So we are off to the races. Public input is the next session, or the next section on the agenda. And I will go into the details of that again. So this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you are watching on CTN, you're going to need to call one of the toll-free numbers that I mentioned before, and I'll read them again. One is 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247, and enter the meeting ID 913-5783-4502. And this information, again, is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone, and you will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area, mute any television or background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. And finally, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. So Missy, I think we had one person waiting to give public comment.
We do. We have a few folks. So
Great.
caller with the last 3 digits, 519.
Hi, my name is Ian Mark. I'm an Ann Arbor resident. My address is 1811 Independence Boulevard. I was calling in support of the local municipalization campaign for our energy grid. I think there's a lot of great reasons to support that, the least of which being making sure we actually meet our A20 goals and decarbonize the energy grid, gain more democratic control over it. But just speaking from my own experiences, one way that I can identify it would have a very direct impact on my life would be a more reliable energy grid. You know, I can think of just one time this last summer, I was without power for over 24 hours. And that was obviously very frustrating. And I looked into it more and I found that even though DTE charges us, I want to say 32% higher than the national average per kilowatt hour, we actually have, let me look up a statistic, but it's it's actually one of the least reliable grids in the country. And a Metro Times analysis revealed that a lot of the grid is actually as many as 40 years beyond its functional life. So just as an Ann Arbor resident, I find that very frustrating that we're paying a premium for a grid that we can't rely on. You know, as the recent emergency in Texas has shown, losing power, it's not just an inconvenience, it can be a matter of life and death for some of our most vulnerable residents. So yeah, that's my spiel on municipalization. I definitely support it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Appreciate you calling in. Missy, do we have a couple of others?
We do, yeah. So caller with the last digits 820.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, my name is Phil Bianco. I am a resident of Ann Arbor in Ward 1. I'm calling similar to the previous caller in support of public power in Ann Arbor, of municipalizing the energy grid, the energy utility in Ann Arbor. I think there are many reasons to support this, to increase local control, to make it more affordable, reliable, and to invest in our community here in Ann Arbor. and also to do the environmentally responsible thing. So yeah, I mean, I think those are all really good reasons to support public power in our city. I would also just like to highlight that, you know, and I hope that the commissioners, and I'm confident that they will, you know, in thinking about this issue, will, you know, strive to make a decision based on what is the right thing to do here, because I think the opposition to it will likely try to sow a lot of fear about lawsuits and other kind of things that could go wrong with a public energy grid. But I really do think that in Ann Arbor, we're a community that takes climate change and environmental responsibility very, very seriously, obviously. And I think we have a really good opportunity here to really lead on this issue by advancing public power in our community. And so I just really urge, and I hope that, you know, as the commissioners are thinking about, you know, this issue and thinking about what it's going to take to make it work, that you really think about what is the thing that's going to be best for, you know, future generations of people, 1 or 2 generations down the line. Because I think, again, we have a really big opportunity here in Ann Arbor to make a difference and to show communities across this country that there's a lot more we can do to stop climate change if we're willing to take on private capital and large corporations like DTE. So thank you for your time, and yeah, thanks.
Thank you for calling in. Do we have a couple more, Missy?
We do, yeah. Caller ending in 772.
Hello, my name is Rowan Tuckermeyer and I live on Shadford Road. So we as a community have to keep our eye on the ball. We are rapidly running out of time to transition our energy infrastructure away from fossil fuels. So you all as energy commissioners are in a unique position to help our community transform our energy system and reduce our carbon emissions. Now the path to achieving this is municipalization, starting with the feasibility study. And frankly, we should have deprivatized our energy system a long time ago when climate change was still off on the horizon. It's outrageous that the public service of energy is controlled by a private monopoly. But this problem is more urgent now than ever before. We cannot continue to wait and hope that DTE will transform their energy infrastructure for us, because it's pretty clear to anyone paying attention that that's not going to happen. Now, in spite of their greenwashing PR campaign, the truth is this: they have no intention of preventing this crisis because they're an investor-owned utility. So if they invested in solar panels, for instance, instead of natural gas, it might give their shareholders a little less money at the end of the day. So their hideously disingenuous carbon zero pledge is actually in stark contrast with reality. They're in fact continuing to invest in new horrendously dangerous fossil fuel infrastructure like this new $1 billion natural gas plant in St. Clair. So DTE isn't going to save us. So if we're truly committed to stopping the climate crisis, our best option is to take the power into our own hands, pun intended. So we can't wait for a CCA either, because first of all, that plan would have to pass through the Michigan legislature. And it's personally very difficult for me to imagine that ever happening. And even if it somehow got passed, we would still be reliant on DTE's infrastructure. Municipalization would be both more feasible and more effective than CCA. We simply cannot waste any more time. If you want to, you all have the ability to help Ann Arbor do its part in the fight against climate change. And so to do this, we need to municipalize our energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more?
Yeah, caller ending in 445.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so my name is Virginia. I reside in East Ann Arbor, and I'm here like the rest of my fellow public commenters to demand that the city transition to a public power utility. Last time I called in, I mentioned that millions of young people's futures are on the line due to climate change and global warming. And I'd like to reiterate that fact and stress that continued inaction is unacceptable. We saw it in the California wildfires that devastated millions of lives and burned acres upon acres of land. We saw it in the recent Texas snowstorms that left millions without power in the freezing cold. And we see it today, where people in this very state, in this very city, are suffering due to extreme temperatures, extreme precipitation, and continued destruction of our ecosystems. You might recall that over half of DTE's energy comes from burning coal, while a small, feeble amount comes from wind and solar power. You have heard stories of your own constituents suffering because of the disastrous consequences of climate change. And you have to understand that with a public power utility, we can finally transition away from dirty fossil fuel energy and towards energy that is clean and sustainable, taking steps to halt the climate crisis and pave the path for future generations. Not taking this step is a failure to the community. And if the impending disaster of a climate crisis isn't enough, municipalization benefits us in other ways. It's more reliable, affordable, and equitable than privatized energy. And it allows us to have a say and a decision in making these decisions that is not owned by powerful for-profit fossil fuel corporations like DTE. It's time to follow through on our promises and municipalize energy here in Ann Arbor. Continued inaction is unacceptable. Thank you.
And thank you for your perspective, Virginia. Missy, do we have any more?
Yep, caller ending in 218. If you're unmuted.
Two and eight, you want to press star, is it star 9, Missy, or star 9 is just to talk? I think star 6 is to unmute.
They're unmuted.
They are, okay.
Yeah, Mirsky.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll circle back.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, we'll be back. 218. Caller ending in 228.
Caller ending in 228.
Hi, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is Greg Woodring calling in. I presented last time with Ann Arbor for Public Power, and I wanted to call in once again to give my perspective on municipalization and specifically talk about how I really do believe that we have an opportunity here in front of us. You know, I'm a pretty young guy. I'm 25 years old, and to be honest, growing up, I haven't seen a lot of hope for the future. The climate crisis is impending, and it seems that every powerful person in the world is dead set against doing anything about it. Our institutions are failing all around us, and frankly, it's a pretty disillusioning time to grow up. But I really do think that we are in a time of crisis, and in times of crises, real change is possible. We really can change the way that our society is structured. We really can take back power into the hands of the people, create a more equitable, just society, a society that isn't built off of the rules that a few cruel and greedy people set. And I believe that municipalization is a step towards that future. It is taking back what should have always been in the public's hands. Electricity is a fundamental part of our lives. It is as ubiquitous as water or heat or shelter. We cannot maintain our standard of living in any sort of way without electricity. And we saw this. We saw this just recently down in Texas, as other commenters have mentioned. When we put such a necessary resource into the hands of a small group of people who are selected due to their ability to maximize profit for people who are not affected by their decisions, we are creating situations where what happened in Texas will happen again and again and again. And we should not replicate that system into the future.
We have to rebuild our entire energy grid. We are not going to be able to continue on with fossil fuels if we are to survive. And so when we look forward towards how are we going to rebuild our energy grid, we should think about how do we want to structure our society around that new grid? How do we want to make changes? Because this is the time we can do it. When we need to rebuild is the time we can do things better. Let's not repeat the mistakes of the past. Let's put power back into the hands of the people. I believe in municipalization because it is going to be a cheaper, more reliable solution that will get us to carbon neutrality. But I also believe that we need to break the stranglehold that these large companies have on the state's politics. We cannot continue to live under the dominion of DTE into the future. We need municipalization. We need to lead on this issue. Ann Arbor can do it. Ann Arbor should do it. And if we do it, others will follow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Greg, for calling in. Thanks for your perspective.
Caller ending in 172.
Hi, yeah, my name is Daniel Smolkin. I'm a native Ann Arborite. I've lived here well over half of my life. And I live in Ward 4. And yeah, I'm calling in support of this push for energy municipalization. You know, my reasons why I support this are twofold. First of all, I think we have a strong ethical imperative to make this change. As the caller just before me mentioned, nowadays you really do need access to electricity in order to meaningfully participate in society. In fact, many vulnerable people, such as people on oxygen or on ventilators, need access to electricity just to stay alive. And so I think it's unconscionable that we have this system in place where there's people profiting off of vulnerable poor people's needs just to stay alive. Aside from that, you know, the IPCC released this report a couple of years ago saying we just have 10 more years to reach carbon neutrality until we have environmental devastation due to climate change. We're going to have mass flooding, we're going to have food shortages, we're going to have water scarcity. And, you know, if we have electricity, then power companies operating under a profit motive, they don't have a reason to change things, you know? CEO Jerry Garcia, he's not going to suffer from food shortages. He's going to be okay. And so why should he do anything to move to carbon neutrality? I think if we want to have a power company that serves everyone instead of just serving the shareholders, then we really need to have municipal energy. Another part of this ethical imperative is, again, as people mentioned, look at what happened in Texas. During power outages, during the blackouts, the cost of electricity skyrocketed up to $9 a kilowatt hour. And in fact, this was done artificially. The markets, you know, went up to maybe $5 or $6, and then they decided to lift it up to the government's mandated limit of $9, and then it stayed there. And so, you know, this is what happens when you have, again, a power company operating under the profit motive. Is they're just going to take advantage of desperate people. And, you know, as climate change gets worse and worse, we're going to see more and more of these freak weather situations. And, you know, this year happened in Texas, but next year it could happen here. You know, it happened in Quebec, for instance, in 1989, they had a big power outage. And so there's this ethical imperative to switch to municipal energy. Aside from that, it's just simply cheaper. You know, on the one hand, again, DTE CEO Jerry Garcia, he makes $7 million a year. I don't see why we should pay his salary just to be able to participate in society and to stay alive. So, you know, and then the data is there as well. The Energy Information Administration, their studies showed that municipal energy tends to be about 14% cheaper than for-profit energy companies. And so, yeah, I just want to emphasize that this is a thing we need to do. This is a thing we can do. It's done elsewhere. Los Angeles has municipal energy. Austin has municipal energy. We can have municipal energy in Ann Arbor, and we have to do it soon, or else things are going to get much worse. Thanks.
Thank you for calling in.
Caller ending in 218. Oops, sorry, 218.
Hey there, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Hi. So my name is David Christensen. I live in Ward 3 of Ann Arbor, and like a lot of my fellow callers here, in fact, all of my fellow callers, I am calling in to support or to voice my support for the municipalization of our energy grid. I'm concerned about the effects of climate change, and I think that municipalization is the only way forward reliably to protect our community from climate change. And so through their actions, DTE does not seem realistically concerned about this crisis. And this is a crisis which, people have already spoken on at length, but I'll just say that we can already see it yearly in other parts of the country, the effects of climate change. And so 59% of DTE's energy comes from burning coal, and this is compared to an average of 23.4% elsewhere. And then DTE, like has already been mentioned, continues to invest billions of dollars in the shale gas infrastructure. And so this is money that could be invested in renewables, but isn't because of the profit motive. And so I know that the H20 plan aims to get Ann Arbor to carbon neutrality by 2030, but I don't see how that's possible while we're relying on DTE. But I do see how we could do that if we had a locally controlled, not-profit motivated public power. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
And thanks for sharing your thoughts with us.
Caller ending in 022.
Hello, am I on?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Madison Zimbrick. I live in Ward 1 in the Park Point apartment complex. I'm a person with multiple medical issues, including very severe sleep apnea, and I rely on electric power to my CPAP machine to keep me breathing at night. Due to the frequent power outages that have affected both Ann Arbor neighborhoods where I've lived, I've missed multiple days of work over the past several years after not being able to sleep at all during overnight power outages. A backup battery to keep my machine running costs several $100s and is not covered by my insurance. I and other people who rely on electrically powered medical devices should not have to pay an excessive price to keep breathing, while our power company diverts their income to paying shareholders instead of towards maintenance and infrastructure development. In the summer of 2019, an extended power outage forced me to flee with my pets to a friend's home in Chelsea when power loss rendered our apartment unlivable and unsafe, with indoor temperatures reaching the high 80s. I recently discovered that because Chelsea has municipalized power, this friend not only has many times more reliable electrical service than I do, but also pays over 30% less than I do for the privilege. I urge the Energy Commission to take affirmative steps towards municipalization so that Ann Arbor residents can enjoy less costly, more reliable, and greener power. Thank you.
Thanks for calling in.
We have a few more, Chair Mirsky. Caller ending in 134.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Stultz and Chair Mirsky. This is Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. I'm really glad that Valerie Braider is with us tonight to speak on the Food Act. It's very generous of her to share her legal expertise. Last month in my public comment, I was wrong in saying that the Food Act had not been tested in court against the 30-year franchise limit set by the Michigan Constitution. My apologies. It has been so tested, and case law solidly favors the utilities, although I think the key state Supreme Court rulings date back more than half a century. I expect that Ms. Braider tonight will provide some guidance on how we might navigate the minefield set by the Food Act in order to achieve our 820 goals. But just as important from my point of view would be guidance as to how we might establish new case law through litigation to nullify the Food Act altogether. Because the Food Act is an anachronism. I'm guessing that when the law was written in 1905, it was intended to provide electric utilities unimpeded access to public right-of-ways to construct transmission lines. That makes sense, but not as an absolute right. Because today the Food Act allows utilities to operate without local franchise agreements with the communities they serve, depriving towns and cities of franchise fees or any control over the quality of their electricity. As we belatedly electrify our buildings and vehicles in response to the climate emergency, we want to power them with clean electrons. The Food Act removes all levers that communities have over their electric utilities. So I hope Ms. Braider can address any opportunities we may have to establish new case law through litigation that would help us and other municipalities directly challenge the Food Act. The Act and its affirming cases are so old and anachronistic that I have to believe such opportunities exist. I'm also looking forward to Paul Fenn's presentation on CCA. I'll just point out two things. First, there's a lot of uncertainty in Michigan around both municipalization and CCA, so it's prudent to keep moving forward on both at this early stage anyway. And second, I hope that there will be a community discussion around RECs and other types of offsets. Offsets are controversial, and maybe Energy Commission can schedule a debate about them as part of this education series. Thank you.
And thank you, Ken. And by the way, we're going to be talking about future topics, and one of the potential agenda items is specifically RECs, offsets, and sinks, and so we will be deciding hopefully our priorities in terms of what those are and when they would be scheduled later on in the meeting. Missy, do we have anybody else on the line?
We do. We have three more. Caller ending in 438.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Hi, my name is Joe Lalonde. I'm a resident of Ward 1 in Ann Arbor at 580 Kellogg Street. I'm calling in to speak in support of municipalization. Municipalization seems to be the only realistic path to reach our carbon neutrality goal of the 820 plan. We really don't have the luxury of time here with climate change to wait for community choice aggregation to be passed in Lansing, or for DTE to be wean off of carbon-based energy. We know, especially because, we know they're going to open a natural gas plant in 2022, so that's their plans for the future. It's up to us as Ann Arborites to decide, does that align with our goals? The fact that municipalization can help us reach our environmental goals, reduce our rates, and create stable union jobs makes this an easy choice for Ann Arbor. Thank you.
And we thank you.
A caller ending in 037.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we do.
Wonderful. My name is Aiden Terhune. I live on 412 Hamilton Street here in Ann Arbor. I, much like everyone else on this call, would like to voice my support for municipalization of power here in Ann Arbor. This is actually my first year as a renter in Ann Arbor, like a proper renter. And boy, howdy, was I getting skewered with electricity bills. Our house was having a really tough time staying warm over this winter. We had our maintenance people come in to try and work with the heating. We were trying insulating our windows, but nothing really seemed to work. And these maintenance guys came a couple times, and nothing was keeping our house warm, and we were just getting skewered with these really high energy bills. And one of my friends who I live with, who is a fellow grad student at the University of Michigan, recently lost his job. And goodness knows rent in Ann Arbor is high enough. And so, with these energy bills, the feasibility of being able to stay here and live here is starting to become almost uncertain, which is really a bummer. And goodness knows it's probably not going to get any better as the climate gets worse. we saw the energy price spikes in Texas when they were kind of in crisis, and goodness knows that if something like that happened in Ann Arbor, I really do not trust DTE to not do the exact same thing. Everyone's already made much better and much more well brought up points than I have as far as like the, actual effects of municipalization. So I won't beat a dead horse all that much. But I think everyone on the city council can see how passionate and invested the community is towards pursuing this goal. And as members of the city council, I would hope that it is also in your best interest to serve the interests and protect the people who you represent and serve. We are a community, and we are all in this together. And this is, I think, overwhelmingly, by just the show of support, this is the best way forward. And I really hope that, the interests of the community are reflected in the decisions by all of you guys. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for giving me my time. Appreciate it.
And we thank you. Thanks for your passion and your thoughts. Missy, do we have one more?
Caller ending in 661.
Great.
Hello, can you hear me?
We do.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Gus Teske. I live at 313 Montgomery in Ward 5. Thanks for this opportunity to talk with you. I'm a member of Ann Arbor Indivisible, and we recently voted to support a resolution given to us by Ann Arbor for Public Power for the Energy Commission to support Ann Arbor for Public Power's exploration of municipal solar power for Ann Arbor. We did that because municipal power has many advantages. For example, power from a municipal solar plant will be cheaper, more reliable, and under our own control, as well as zero carbon. And it doesn't have to be approved by the state legislature. Another concern is that though DTE says its plan is to be carbon neutral by 2050, it has no real plan. And now President Biden has set a goal for U.S. to be zero carbon, U.S. electricity to be zero carbon by 2035. Will that end up sticking Ann Arbor ratepayers with useless stranded assets that we have to pay off? Municipal power avoids that problem and enables Ann Arbor to do its part to avoid looming climate breakdown. So I urge you to quickly move to support a feasibility study for municipal solar power in Ann Arbor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gus. Thanks for calling in.
It looks like we have one more caller ending in 971.
Hello, can you hear me?
We do.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name's Casey Patnode. I live at 820 Fuller Street in Ann Arbor. I'm also a medical and public health student at the University of Michigan, and I'm calling to speak out in favor of municipalization. And the context I wanted to speak through it is through my expertise in terms of human health and the intersection with climate change, as well as fossil fuel generation. Municipalization has been shown to be more efficacious in terms of reducing emissions, both in terms of carbon dioxide for generating towards climate change, as well as the other co-pollutants that are produced from fossil fuel generation. These pollutants have been shown to disproportionately affect marginalized populations, though it's an environmental justice issue, really. And these pollutants result in things like pulmonary and cardiovascular diseases that especially affect the vulnerable populations among us. This includes children, the elderly, and those who are already struggling with medical conditions. So I believe it's our responsibility as stewards of our environment and people who care about our communities to explore the initiatives that are going to help us protect them and protect our environment and protect each other. And I believe that municipalization has shown that it has the greatest chance of success in that regard. And in addition to all of the other benefits that have been brought up in terms of reliability and democratic representation of our constituents. So I would just urge looking at this through a health, lens and thinking about what you care about and who you care about, because municipalization is a chance to protect them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Casey. Missy, is that it? So I'd like to thank all the callers for sharing their thoughts and for your engagement. And I would like to also encourage all of you for staying on in the meeting. I think there's going to be some interesting presentations coming up. And yeah, so again, thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. The next point on the agenda is the energy report.
John, can I make a comment?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
I just wanted to point out that, rental housing is notoriously energy inefficient. And while I share the concern of the gentleman who's renting, I had two daughters rent houses in Ann Arbor as well. And, we have one green landlord in Ann Arbor who rents energy efficient houses. And, if we take DTE's energy and waste it with uninsulated walls, uninsulated ceilings, leaky windows and doors, just replacing DTE's energy with Ann Arbor's energy through municipality and wasting that is not going to achieve anything except the same amount of pollution. Or whether you generate it with Ann Arbor owned solar panels or DTE's frack gas, either way, if you throw that energy out the doors, windows, walls, and ceiling, it's not going to solve the problem. So, one of the issues municipalization, perhaps the people who are supporting it so much and looking at it may also want to look at how we're going to use that energy efficiently. And maybe if we move to that now and got the landlords in town to actually make their buildings energy efficient, we'd be a long way closer towards any green option, municipalization or anything else. So hopefully we can put that on their agenda too and turn to the landlords and ask them about, why there's no insulation in the attic. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for sharing those thoughts with us. And I might just add to that and say the 820 plan has 7 strategies. The first of which is getting 100% clean and renewable energy. And as you point out, there are other strategies, including energy efficiency related strategies and electrifying everything. So we have a number of different fronts that we have to be working on. Does anybody else have any other comments before we will be have news from commissioners as well, but does anybody have any specific comments that they want to share in response to public comment?
Just very quickly, I want to thank all of the commissioners, all the individuals who got on again today. It was another good 45 minutes of hearing from the public, which is great to hear. I also want to thank Ken Garber for emailing me back on a couple of questions I had from the last Energy Commission meeting. And again, as things develop, we really want to maintain that level of civic activism and engagement with the commission. So please continue to phone in and communicate. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Robert. Anybody else? I can't see you also unless somebody speaks up. We'll go to Missy, and Missy can give us an update from staff and the Office of Sustainability and Innovations.
Thank you, Chair Mirsky. I have a lot, but I'm going to go rapid fire because we have 2 wonderful speakers who are donating their time to us tonight. So I'll put something together in writing and send it out to the commission to further elaborate on these. But in rapid succession, here we go. Our rooftop RFP is out. Responses are due on the 25th. That's for somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 megawatts of rooftop solar at 13 city facilities. We're working on standing up a parallel RFP for all the affordable housing sites as well. So we expect a doubling of distributed generation at municipal facilities. Very exciting. Our work with intervention in the voluntary green power program continues to emerge and is looking promising. So stay tuned for more. We're working on our energy strategy, and we're nearly done. And very excitingly, the energy education group of this commission will be meeting shortly. But we have been in conversations with Rocky Mountain Institute and the World Resources Institute to help design some of the training around the different programs that we're talking about here, so that we have different ways for the public to access. Recognizing there are actually a lot of levers that we can pull. So we want to move that forward, and are pretty excited to see that emerge. We, to that point, have talked to the Rocky Mountain Institute about doing a joint session between the Energy Commission and the Planning Commission for our May 11th meeting, focused on beneficial electrification with a special emphasis. We'll talk about the whole market, but really thinking about commercial and multifamily, because the Planning Commission is bumping up against this a lot as they're looking to encourage smart investments. So Chair Mirsky and I will be following up to see if that's of interest to folk, but RMI has offered that. They offered it, I think, on Friday. So that's, I'm excited to learn about what's going on in that space. And then we are launching A20 week to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the adoption of A20. That will be June 1st through June 6th. More details coming. Everything is designed to be decentralized, kind of self-paced, and every day there'll be a few activities that cut across that whole week, but every day there'll be an opportunity to learn, to do, and to have a little fun. So we're working on launching all of those different elements, so stay tuned. And if you happen to be listening and want to join in with either helping us teach, have a little fun, or kind of celebrate, please circle up with me, that'd be great. Earth Day as well, we're doing a completely virtual Earth Day. All of our keynotes are youth, so we're partnering with Ann Arbor Public Schools to host that. It'll be the 25th of April. More details coming shortly. They'll be on the A20 website, which is just a2gov.org/sustainability, but I'll circulate that to everyone. Really excited to partner with public schools in that space. And then just wanted to elevate, our benchmarking ordinance has gotten some really good public feedback. This is for disclosure of commercial and multifamily energy and water usage. And then the time of marketing is close on its heels. This is for single family homes to disclose usage. And then we continue to investigate where the levers are for us to do more requirements, more encouragement, et cetera, of rental, per Commissioner Klebe's comment, a really important area of work. And so we've got a few opportunities on the horizon, working with some council members to kind of think about how we may be able to incentivize landlords doing more faster in that landscape, and some other possible levers. There are about a dozen other things, but I'm going to stop there. A little busy in the office, but delightfully so. So thank you for the opportunity to give an update.
That's great. So I'd like to open up to updates from other commissioners, news, and any updates that they might want to share from us from the organizations that they're involved with or familiar with. You're just gonna have to speak up again because I cannot see all of you at the same time. I guess I can change my view, but.
Hey, John, go ahead, Mark. I'll go second.
Okay, I was just to say for anyone who missed Chuck's really good presentation on Energy Systems 101 at the last meeting, he's going to repeat that and probably repeat it with more of an emphasis on solar on Thursday night at the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association's Clean Energy Seminar Series. I believe all of you have received invitations. So Chuck's going to be there on Thursday, and Julie Baldwin from the Public Service Commission is going to be next month. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Mark, for organizing the series, and thanks, Chuck, for presenting.
So
Chuck, you said you were going to present, or you had a comment too, right?
Yeah, if you really need a cure for insomnia, just tune in on Thursday. I'll put you to sleep for sure. Just some really good news to present to everybody is that after 2 years of working on this, ASCE has now issued a ANSI standard on sustainable infrastructure. So it's a standard that basically allows owners to deal with how do we invest in technologies, infrastructure, systems that are the best in terms of sustainability. That has passed ANSI standards. It's going to get published here this summer. I'm pleased to announce I was part of the writing team, as was Dr. Stoltz. So this is a major effort, took a lot of ordeals to work through. And it's amazing that it's now getting published and we're already being criticized that we weren't overly pressing for carbon reduction. We are already. It's a pretty significant requirement in the standard that a project demonstrate its ability to reduce carbon, but it's already under attack for being even more aggressive. So it's kind of interesting to see where that's, is all headed. So that's it for tonight. Thanks.
Great. Chuck, could you share that with us maybe in an email afterwards or in chat, either way or both?
Yep, soon. Yep.
Yep, great. Thank you. Carlene and then Ember.
I have a quick update. For about the past
year, I've been going back and forth with folks at the Underwriters Laboratory to reboot their training program for electric vehicle charging station installation. And they finally have taken it up. They're working on the redesign, the update. They did it back in 2009, and so much has changed since then.
Wow.
And so they're going to be launching their new training program. And it's electricians and certified electricians will be able to just basically advertise and promote themselves as being EVSE certified through the Underwriters Laboratory. And that'll be something that they can use to, you know, advertise additional specialties that they provide for their services. And you know, the city can maybe include information about that on its A20 website when folks are looking things up.
Thanks for your relentless advocacy, Carly. So Ember and then Teresa.
Yeah, just a quick event announcement. Tomorrow, Naomi Klein's giving the School for Environment and Sustainability's WEGI lecture. I heard her speak a few years ago. She was really incredible. Definitely recommend going. You have to register ahead of time to get the Zoom link. So I can also send the link out to the energy commissioners, but if you Google it, you could find it too.
Thanks,
Anyone
Ember.
listening?
I'm going to attend. Teresa.
For those that are interested in things that are happening at the federal and multi-state level, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has launched a commissioner-led technical conference on resource adequacy in the evolving electric markets. And so that is on March 23rd and 24th of this month. And so I can send that link out to the commissioners who are interested. And then also know that the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator is also in the middle of a series of technical work groups and a task force on distributed energy resources and how they would implement FERC Order 2222 on aggregation of DER resources. And so that calendar is up on the Mid-Continent too. So if you need the link to that, let me know. But those are just some of the other things that are going on kind of at the Mid-Continent and the federal level.
Great, great developments. Anyone else have something to share? If nobody else has anything to share, I have just maybe two things to share. First is that I worked with Jan Culbertson and a gentleman who works for, for the CO2, the global CO2, what is it called? Global CO2 Initiative at the University of Michigan, looking at embodied energy. That draft resolution is currently with staff and being evaluated by staff. We're supposed to get feedback by the end of this month. And so it's a possibility, hopefully, that I'll be able to present that in one of our upcoming meetings, maybe in our next meeting. And we were present. I want to remind everyone on the commission that there are five basically different working groups that Missy presented as opportunities for us to get involved. And I believe most of those are now up and running. And so if any of you want to latch on to any one of those, a poll just went out today for working on concierge services, which is basically technical service for support for homeowners as well, for any property owners, basically. So if you haven't had a chance to get involved and then you want to do that, get with either Missy, me, or Carlene. And then Missy, I have one request and we'll hold it for the end. You sent out an email and you talked about concerns about what constitutes or that we're potentially via email conducting business and deliberations outside of meetings with some of our communication. And maybe at the end, we can take a minute or two to talk about that, to share. I may be one of the guilty parties, and anything that you can do to keep us on the straight and narrow would be good, but we'll do that after Valerie and Paul sign off. So I think we're ready to go into our first presentation, and we've got actually two, I think, that Valerie is going to present to us, but I think Missy, maybe, do you want to briefly introduce Valerie for us, or Valerie, do you want to do that yourself?
I'm happy to completely embarrass Valerie if I could even try to. Valerie Braider is an exceptional energy attorney. She's a Rhodes Scholar, worked at the state, has now her own practice, and is someone who we've been working with at the city to really navigate the energy landscape. And I will say one of the things that I really personally appreciate about, well, there's lots of things I appreciate about Val, but the thing I want to elevate right now is that oftentimes when we talk to attorneys with and we present something, we get a yes or no answer. And Valerie's been incredibly helpful as a thought partner in finding the gray and how we kind of navigate that landscape. And so I just want to elevate that creativity, I think, is exactly what we're hearing is necessary, and we all know is really deeply necessary in this space. So I just want to say thank you. And Valerie, over to you. I'll get this going for you.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. And what I just want to kind of give everybody a tour on is sort of how people got permission in the first place to sort of serve a community with energy, and kind of all the different sort of court cases. As we heard from folks commenting tonight, there's a lot of interest in sort of how this evolved. So I'm going to go, obviously, because of the presentation format, I can't see if folks are asking questions, but I would hope that you'll jump in if there are questions. Although obviously I'm happy to answer them at the end too, but happy as we go along if things come up. So this is a picture of when Ann Arbor granted its first electric franchise in 1895. So you can see we were literally still in the horse and the cart, with the horse before the cart. That was good. The franchise was granted to the Washtenaw Light and Power Company, which later was bought by Eastern Michigan Edison Company. So essentially why people ever gave franchises, which is essentially the right to serve customers and under what conditions you can use public right-of-way to install those power lines, which you can see the one I've circled there, and run the wires, et cetera, is that it's a pretty big investment, right, to bring electricity to anyone. And there was a lot of concern that you couldn't get funding if there were more than one person kind of going to the capital markets. So you saw a mix of basically municipalities and other governmental entities trying to stand up some service, and then often private companies coming in and arguing for franchises to be granted locally. And the different cities had different ways of doing it. Some cities let women vote on whether or not a franchise would be granted if they were taxpayers and owners. Some didn't. Some had, elected officials do it. So it was sort of, back in 1895 was a new thing. Franchises were actually a somewhat new thing too. And so folks were really feeling it out. So Missy, can you go to the next one? So in 1905, the legislature gets involved and it passes the Foot Act, which basically said if you were a private company and you were serving in an area, you got a perpetual right to continue serving that area. And it was supposed to be irrevocable, was the word used in the legislation. And so since Ann Arbor had granted a franchise for light, heat, and power, it in theory applied to that, right? That was one of the things. It's important to note that that franchise is not exclusive. And this is skipping ahead a bit, but in 1949, this is again affirmed in a court case without the utilities arguing otherwise. So although it's sort of a right for that one private company to serve, it was not a ban on complementary or dual public power franchises. So for instance, there are still cities today where, while there is a municipal utility that serves part of the city, an investor-owned utility serves another part. So Lansing is a great example. Consumers serve some of the MSU campus. Lansing Board of Power and Light serves other parts of the MSU campus, would be just like one example. So what does that franchise include? It does include the right to place electrical infrastructure on the right-of-ways, and also that customers, right? You can't just go hook up customers. If you were like a different private company and you wanted to come in and start hooking people up, you could not do that because the franchise in that sense is exclusive. So it's not exclusive for public power, but it would be exclusive for other private developers. So everyone hated the Foot Act basically as soon as it got passed. People were very angry about it. And you see that because in 1907, 1908, Michigan had a constitutional convention, and new provisions get added to the Constitution that are clearly a response to the Foot Act, right? It says, look, you cannot, if there's any franchise that's granted, voters have to approve it. Now, ironically, some places had identified voters to be a little bit more broad than the state did at the time. So there were a few people that argued that this deprived women from the right to vote on the franchises. That got corrected 10 years later, right, when Michigan affirms the right of women to vote. But so they do say voters have to approve the franchise. And they also made a big point of noting that local governments retained the use of city streets, and you had to have local approval to do that. So clearly a response, and a very strong one, to the Foot Act, now making essentially big provisions of the Foot Act unconstitutional. Just as a note, that Constitutional Convention also reaffirmed, or in that case affirmed, the rights of municipalities to provide water utilities, electric utilities, all those kind of things, and gave some restrictions to their ability to do so outside of their territorial limits versus inside. So that goes into the Constitution. Yeah, Missy, you can go forward. So, of course, then the first thing that happens is people begin to sue to say the new Constitution invalidates the Foot Act. And the city that really leads the way on this is the city of Lansing. And by 1914, that reaches the Michigan Supreme Court. And the court issued a pretty strong opinion against the city of Lansing. It said that the Michigan Constitution could not retroactively terminate the Foot Act franchises, because it said the Foot Act franchises had basically were property rights that were granted to private companies, and that under the US Constitution, the contract clause prevents governments from negating that. So if you enter it, there's a US constitutional provision that essentially says you can't interfere with contracts. And the Michigan Supreme Court says this is a property right. And so you can't have the Constitution come in and take away a right that was granted, because it would be unconstitutional under the federal Constitution. And that proposition was sort of argued in 1994 in the City of Marshall case. And the Michigan Court of Appeals cited that proposition, basically cited that City of Lansing is still good law. The other big thing that the City of Lansing case found is that if the city had not issued a local franchise, that, if they were refusing to grant one, that did not invalidate a Foot Act franchise. There was an argument that essentially, okay, they were serving, but we don't have a local government permission for franchises. And that the court said, no, the Foot Act was broad enough to reach that and did not require that the local government did a Foot Act. So basically the local government couldn't just revoke a franchise and have that invalidate the Foot Act franchise that was granted. And that also kind of was re-argued in 2001 by West Bloomfield Township. And the Michigan Court of Appeals, again, kind of cites that City of Lansing case to reaffirm that, nope, you can't just say, well, we're revoking our franchise, so your Foot Act franchise doesn't work anymore. So that's kind of what happened in 1914. So then people still hated the Foot Act a lot. So there was a new kind of line of attack that came. And I'll say a little bit more about this because it's a little confusing on corporate history in Michigan. So when they passed the 1905 Foot Act, there was actually a constitutional provision in the prior constitution That said, no corporation could have a longer life than 30 years. So you could renew your corporation, but if you like started a company on your company's 30th anniversary, that company went away and you had to create a new company and like transfer all your stuff to it. So that is no longer Michigan law, but that was the law when the Foot Act was passed. So after everyone loses in 1914, they wait 30 years until, okay, now if it was granted, the corporation it was granted to shouldn't still exist. And so they bring this new line of attack that's based on this idea. So they say, essentially, we're beyond the 30 years, so the act has expired. And the Supreme Court in Village of Constantine, who was the one that brought this initial challenge, said nope. If the corporation was allowed to renew its life back in the 1890s, and as long as it's kept renewing it, that Foot Act is still good. Essentially, the contract allows that transferability. So people had other ideas, though, about maybe there was a different way we could use that 30-year corporate life idea. And they said, essentially, these aren't the same companies anymore. Like, this was granted to the Washtenaw Light and Power Corporation, right? So would be the corollary. Ann Arbor didn't bring this, but we granted it to them. Now it's somebody with Edison in their name, like not the same company, not the same franchise, not the same corporate life, right? So it goes out. And in a case brought by Traverse City, they said no. The Michigan Supreme Court ruled that Foot franchises are transferable and recognized that this made them essentially perpetual. So, the idea that essentially Washtenaw Power and Light could transfer it to an Edison, which could transfer it to a different Edison, which could transfer it, like that none of those transfers invalidated the rights that were there. So those remain. So those were, and as you've seen, there have been some court cases since that sort of retest some of these, but everything I just said kind of at this point remains good law. That being said, it is, again, important to remember that there are limitations to the Foot Act franchise. The first, as I mentioned, is that they are not exclusive. So a municipality is not prohibited from serving just because there is a Foot Act franchise. You essentially can have competition between a municipal utility and an IOU or other utility with a franchise, IOU being investor-owned utility, something that's often used to describe like the DTs and consumers, that kind of thing. So, so again, it's just important to note that that has been recognized for a long time in these court decisions. The other thing is that while there are property rights, there are also abilities for governments to take property rights from private companies and individuals. So, this is sort of the condemnation or the taking, like in the same way, if, the city needed to build a road and your house was in the middle, there are procedures under which, even if you don't want to sell it, right, the city can take it. They have to pay you fair compensation for it, right? And it has to be for a public purpose. So it can't be to give it to another private individual. That has changed under Michigan law and been affirmed. So for instance, like a city couldn't take a Foot Act franchise away from DTE to give it to consumers, right? Or a different private company. It can only be taken for a public purpose and not for a private right. And I've given the MCL on that, but that would also be a constitutional principle based on some Michigan Supreme Court decisions in the semi-recent past. So you have
Valerie, could you speak to that? I think there's somebody else that has the same question maybe that I do. Does that mean that taking would be allowed in the case of forming a municipal utility?
Yeah, so there are different ways that could be done. One would be to sort of form it and do a sort of alongside utility. Another might be to actually like try, do a taking of all the wires, all the poles, all that. Right. Obviously, there is value in just having the right to serve, right? That would be potentially taken in that context. But also obviously the more physical stuff you take, right, the more valuable that is. So there, to my knowledge, has not been a major city that has completed an analysis of what it would cost to take. The closest example I'm aware of would be Boulder in Colorado. They spent, I think, I'd have to go back and check, something over $20 million. And they got to almost the point at which the utility was going to have to give them a number when they decided to withdraw their attempts to municipalize. So I think they got the closest to figuring out the number. Most places that have municipalized are much, much smaller and have not, to my knowledge, done it through a taking. But I could be educated in that. I'm just not aware that any has done it.
I think we had somebody else who wanted to comment on this.
Mark does. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Valerie, you said the condemnation for public purpose. Is climate change or achieving reduced emissions a public purpose? In other words, if we've heard the DTE is going to meet their goal in 2050, the Biden administration wants to do it in 2035, and we want to do it in 2025. If a building is being run by fossil fuels and they'd be willing to be run by renewable energy, can we condemn that account, I guess, or condemn some part of DTE, perhaps the fossil fuel part, and say you only deliver green power?
Right. Well, I mean, the courts have recognized that the right to serve is itself a valuable property right. So it isn't just that the wires have value, but that essentially the value of everything they might make off that account is potentially also a value that would have to be paid. I would also just say on timelines, I think, again, the city of Boulder spent at least 8 years on the attempt. It might be longer. So I would not want to, make a guess on exactly how long it would take, but I can tell you 2025 does not sound to me like it would be likely. Because I think, that just to understand in general the process of a taking, right, and I'll use a much simpler, just physical, is first the government has to identify a public purpose, which, by the way, provision of heat, power, and light are recognized by the Constitution as public purposes, right? There are lots of municipal utilities in Michigan that do that. So you don't necessarily have to do a big reach to say climate change is our purpose. You could just be like, we want to provide light, heat, and power as we're entitled to do under Article 7 of the Michigan Constitution, right? So the public purpose isn't necessarily the hard part, so to speak. The hard part would be to actually then determine the value, right? And there would be, experts on both sides, right, that would argue about what it is. The city would first have to do evaluation, provide that. There's a chance to challenge that in court. That can be appealed. That can be appealed again, up to the Michigan Supreme Court. So just as you sort of saw that, the Constitution gets changed in 1908, but the city of Lansing gets a ruling on the Foot Act in 1914. I would not say that our courts have grown incredibly speedier, right? There's electronic filing, but I would not expect a much, much faster legal path beyond all the other, considerations of how long it might take you to value it, et cetera.
Ember might know more about this, but my recollection is Boulder took like you said, 8 years and spent 28 million. But I think the legal framework was different, and some of that back and forth was based on those different legal questions. Jay, I see you have your hand up.
Can I just respond to that though? So the city of Boulder actually didn't have what we have, with the Foot Act franchise. Their franchise was actually up. So in some ways theirs was easier because they weren't trying to buy out an existing franchise, but they did want to buy some of the equipment so they could actually operate the utility internally.
Right.
So just for what's worth, that they didn't have this same complication that we have under Michigan law in Boulder.
Thank you.
Sure.
Jay, go ahead.
Yep. My question, I guess, gets into when they're trying to determine the value. Can they take into account the social cost of carbon and we've got now a number set at the federal level. We don't have a number set at the Michigan level, and we also don't have a number set at the Ann Arbor city level. Is there any way that either the federal level number could be taken into account, or we could create our own number, even if Michigan doesn't have one, that could be taken into account for the value?
Yeah, so from a legal history perspective, I can't tell you because no one's ever tried that. So I couldn't say. It would not be a traditional way to do it. So I suspect it would be subject to challenge on, nope, you're just supposed to say, what would someone pay for it today? Or here's how much I would make off it. But again, no one's tried it. So I couldn't, I'm not going to say, no, it would never work, right? Because we just do not know legally whether that could be done. But it would definitely be a departure from ways it had been done earlier, which, you know, it's always harder to do something that's never been done before and you don't know whether it's going to work than it would be to do kind of the traditional way to do it, right?
Valerie, go ahead. I don't see any other hands.
Okay, so I just wanted to kind of finish up with a sense of where municipalization is generally. So in the US, according to the American Public Power Association, in the last 2 decades, there are 12 communities across the United States that have municipalized. Most of those are very small. Like I don't think you'd recognize the names of any unless you were like really into who municipalized power or something. So it really has not been done all that often. But it's not to say it's never been done, right? 12 have in the last 20 years. In Michigan, there is a community in the Upper Peninsula that has just refused to renew its franchise. It does not have a Food Act franchise. There's actually a deadline on it. Their franchise is with UPCO, which has the highest rates in the state. It's sort of the central Upper Peninsula. And that case is before the Michigan Supreme Court now. They're sort of briefing on whether or not the Supreme Court will take it. The Court of Appeals decision was very strong in favor of the community being allowed to terminate their franchise. However, the real question is, like, would the utility be required to remove all their stuff? If they left it, would the city have to pay for it, right? And all of those questions, you know, are still, you know, to my knowledge, still being kind of, you know, argued through. I know that the city believes that it would like the light poles, I think, removed, is from what I've heard, because they want to put in newer stuff. But the cost of removal is actually high enough that the utility might just be like, no, it's yours now. You know, and then and potentially leaving the environmental liability for that with the city as well. So while that, like, it's an interesting development, I don't think that we've kind of seen the end of it, because again, this is a pretty unusual thing to have happen, that a franchise would be rejected. And so there isn't like a whole body of, oh yeah, so once you do it, like this happens, then this happens, you know, that sort of checkbox isn't there. But again, that's something that is different from Ann Arbor's situation, because that city did not have electric service in 1905. And so their franchises were granted under the new constitutional provisions, not the 1905 Food Act.
So I'm going to ask a question that I know has been posed by others, I think not on the commission, at least not anymore. And that is, do you have a rough idea of how many pre-Food Act franchises there are in Michigan? And can you name off a handful if they're significant?
Well, I mean, everybody you saw do in my previous slides had a Food Act franchise. So pretty much, you know, huge chunks of Oakland County, chunks of Macomb County, Washtenaw, Traverse City, Lansing, you know, places people lived and had electricity in 1905, essentially. So, you know, there are definitely places in Michigan that developed well after that. But a ton of places in Michigan that had it before. Wayne County was exempted. So, you know, you can cross out those, but there are Food Act franchises all over the state of Michigan.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? If you do, raise your hand and I'll see you. While I'm waiting for people to do that. Okay, good. We have full view of everybody now. Robert, go ahead.
So Noah, you just mentioned that Wayne County was exempted from the law. Could you say why?
No, I don't. Unfortunately, like the Foot Act legislative history does not explain like why Wayne County doesn't have to do it when everybody else did. So no, I don't know why, but it is specifically called out.
Gotcha. And I had one other quick follow-up question, kind of more of a speculative question. Given this issue and your experience dealing with the judicial system, do you feel like it's an issue that could be broken down cleanly along partisan lines, or do you think this is something that has a very solid judicial, foundation that even changing court makeups might, not have any sort of impact on a ruling on that?
No, there are U.S. Supreme Court precedents that the Michigan Supreme Court relied on, and there have been similar cases brought on some of these questions in North Carolina and others that the U.S. Supreme Court has issued decisions that are pretty much in favor of utilities on. So anytime you've got like a long history of both the Michigan Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court kind of ruling one way on an issue, it's not to say they've never ever changed their minds, but I wouldn't say, a justice here or there is going to make a difference. Courts do change their minds sometimes about big things that there are precedents on, but there is just a long history here. And in general, the folks arguing against the utility franchises have not done particularly well. Again, it's not a universal loss. It's not that they've never won anything or there aren't like parts of it, but it is just an uphill slog if you're trying to invalidate a property right that was granted.
Thank you.
Because in general, the courts, have that has big implications, right? So they're often reluctant to overturn those decisions.
Ember, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer some explanation for Boulder because I think that we get compared to it a lot, and I don't think the legal context is the same. And even how you described, they in 2011 had to amend their city charter to authorize a municipality. They weren't allowed to have it in their state or local legal context in the same way that we are. And then in 2014, Excel, their investor-owned utility, sued them saying that they had to prove that they could offer cost at a lower rate than the utility could, and then Excel sued them over saying they wouldn't be able to do that, and they had kind of some shady practices in order to do that. So I still don't think the legal context is quite the same or that it's necessarily easier or more complicated than it is in Ann Arbor, but I just would caution against comparing us to them because I think the legal contexts are very different.
It's totally fair that the legal contexts are different. Like what I just meant on the franchise issue alone, like they had an easier thing in that they could turn down the franchise. They did not necessarily have it easier in other ways. And I'm sorry if I implied that it would be like easier for us than that. I think it was difficult for them, as obviously was proved, and they had lots of elections on various issues. I'm just saying, on the franchise issue alone, they had an easier path than Michigan communities that had power before 1905 would.
Mark, go ahead.
So, Valerie, I don't know if you want to opine on this or not, but it seems that if the courts aren't the way to do this, and the legislature doesn't seem open to it, and the Public Service Commission has already signed off on both, DTEs and consumers' plans, and so we're in a quandary as a community that if we're going to achieve net zero, we got to figure out something. Either get the utilities to do something there that don't want to do, or find some other alternative. And I guess to me, the alternative is the city has tools. They have property taxes. They have things, and they have incentives to do distributed solar on as many buildings as possible, like Ann Arbor's doing its government buildings, and to get serious about energy efficiency. reduce the load as much as possible and do as much on-site solar as we can, and hope that the utilities will make up the difference at some point. But it moves the dial for us, as opposed to these other options that don't seem to be options. Getting DTE to change its IRP, or getting the courts to somehow magically change 100 years of case law. I don't see a path. So do you? I mean, do you agree decentralized solar and energy efficiency, or is there of another option?
So I think, as you know, Mark, I'm a big fan of energy efficiency. It's also the only energy investment you can make that works when the power is off to help you out, as well as when the power is on, right? And I just want to note that, I've really enjoyed working with Missy. I really love working for my city because it is trying to be creative on this. And she mentioned briefly the VGP case. I'm counsel to the city on that. One of the things that we've been arguing for, and in testimony, DTE has indicated they're open to, is designing both a community solar offering where people who can't put it on their property could actually participate, if they wanted to, and on the same kind of footing that Ann Arbor would get. And also that they're interested in talking with us about one thing we can do under Michigan law that a lot of states can't, which is get credit for off-site energy efficiency. Instead of or with paying, building a solar array or wind, you could also, insulate a low-income housing, or, advance environmental justice goals by going to a community that's really suffered from your past energy and making all their schools a lot more energy efficient or something like that. There are only 4 states where you can get a renewable energy credit for having done that kind of work, which we know reduces carbon directly by pulling demand off the system. DTE has, in their testimony, said that they would be interested in working on a voluntary product like that, which would be innovative. Now, obviously, we are still in settlement discussions, so all we have right now that we can share is what they said in testimony in response to Ann Arbor's arguments about why this would be a good product. But I do give the city a lot of credit because it was really coming up with more creative ways and raising them in important forums where hopefully, if the utility isn't going to do it on their required programs, they could at least offer options for individuals that want to get greener.
Valerie, is that essentially a virtual power reduction agreement? Is that essentially what it is?
It is.
It is. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
Where you're paying someone else to reduce their use by helping them insulate or buy a boiler, that kind of thing. Yes, a virtual power reduction agreement.
Okay, great. Thanks for the clarification. Erica, go ahead.
Thanks. So I just want to make sure I summarize correctly what I've learned this evening, which is that municipalization it's not that it's impossible for us, it's just that it's a very long process in terms of identifying what those costs would be for our community, and that ultimately it would be very expensive because it would be considered a takings, and just the right to serve in itself is a particularly likely to be a particularly expensive cost to have to compensate DTE for that piece. And then I have a follow-up question on that.
Yeah, I think if you want to go the takings route, it's fair to say that's going to be a long and expensive path. Regardless of what your exact signposts are, I think cities that have tried it could tell you that.
Okay. And then you mentioned that this is not, it's not an exclusive contract. So it is entirely possible to set up a municipal energy company here in terms of thinking about something like that might happen in terms of who those new customers might be. I assume it couldn't take customers away from those who are already currently being serviced. It would pretty much be, is that correct? It would be new folks, or is it competition?
There definitely that you could do new folks. There's just no question about that. But there would actually be a pretty big debate that you are allowed to compete internally. Now, I can say this, what I would also encourage you to think about is what it is why you want a utility, right? The goals that you have that a utility might get you, and think about, is this the best way to get them? Are there other ways to get them, right? If your goal is just, we want to build more renewables, maybe a utility is a way to do that. Maybe there are other ways to do that. If it's that we want to do energy efficiency, you may be able to do programs that way too. Now, I'm not trying to say you couldn't do a utility, right? And do these things, or that it's a wrong answer. But, to the extent people are interested in exploring this, I would just encourage them to kind of say, if there are particular outcomes they want, kind of aside from a philosophical preference, which obviously if you have the philosophical preference presence, that's the way to do it. But if there are certain outcomes you're going for, it may be worth sort of kind of making your list and thinking about how you achieve them, and what's your most cost-effective and fastest way to do that. And it may be that when you do that exercise, you think a utility is the faster, cheaper way, but there may be other ways to get to those same outcomes that don't raise the same legal costs or, let you get there. So again, I'm not trying to advocate either way tonight. I'm just sort of trying to give information about how you might think about it. Mm-hmm. Because the one thing I do know is that if municipalization is going to be, if it were to be pursued, is going to be legally contentious, right?
Yeah, and then, thank you, that's very helpful. And then in terms of, in the scenario where there was competition happening, how does hypothetically, how does existing infrastructure play into that
Yeah, so this is where the theory that you could compete and the reality of competition, you have to think it through. So to the extent you want to offer your own street lighting system, then you're laying your own wires, you're putting up your own poles, right? To the extent you want to serve a house or a business, you need to run underground wires to them the same way DTE does, right? And let them hook up, or you need to take DTE's line, right? So if you're really trying to avoid that whole takings argument, then you're talking about laying parallel infrastructure and trying to bond for that and getting financing for that without a guarantee that that customer will stick with you, right? If you think about why we ever had franchises, it was because you had trouble getting money if there was even one competitor, because the cost of laying all that wire and kind of setting up all that infrastructure was so high that in 1895, you couldn't get financing unless you could kind of guarantee that you had a monopoly, right, going in. And I'm not saying that it would be impossible to get financing or that wouldn't be worth exploring. I'm not trying to say that's closed, but to the extent that you want to lay parallel, right, you're going to need money for that. And what, the financing for that, if the homeowner then is upset with Ann Arbor and switches back, right, which they would have or the business does or whatever, someone gives them a better deal and now they're over there, right? You've still got that infrastructure, you still have to maintain it, right? Which just gets us back to why franchises ever existed,
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Robert.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question to piggyback off of Councilmember Briggs's questions. Along the same lines of, you have to, this is probably a very easy yes answer, but I just wanted to confirm that along the lines of you have to lay your own wires, you have to build your own poles, you also have to hire all of your own people and then do all of your own maintenance and basically gain all of this knowledge of how to run a municipal grid that, no one in the city has that type of knowledge or expertise necessarily that they've done at scale of that size. Okay, maybe Chuck does, but I just it's also just thinking about that, the human resources and the human costs in addition to the physical and the material costs.
Yeah, if you look at municipalities in Michigan that have their own utilities, they do have higher per resident payrolls usually, just because they're providing a whole service that others aren't, right? In the same way that those who don't have municipal water, right, have fewer people who tend to work for them because there's that whole billing department, maintenance guys, the folks who do the contracting for the off work, all that kind of internal staffing that it takes to run a utility business is gone, right? So Most cities that do, in fact, I can't think if there's a single example of a municipal utility that doesn't also have water and sewer. I think they all do. And they tend to share billing when they do. Again, there might be like, I don't know exactly what the city of Norway has. I don't know exactly, but a lot of the big cities do that. So, in that Ann Arbor does bill people for utilities, like you could probably piggyback on the billing, but a whole lot of other things are very unique to an electrical utility. So you would definitely need personnel who don't currently work for the city. You would need to hire people to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the great questions. We have another presentation, so I'm going to encourage us to move on. And if anybody has, Valerie, are you going to stick around for the next presentation?
I have supervised bedtime at 8 o'clock, and I'm getting the sense that may become more frantic. So if I go, it's not because I wouldn't have enjoyed staying, but I have other obligations.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for your presentation. And there's another point in the agenda, which I don't think is a separate presentation. It's just a document that's linked for everybody's edification, and that's the actual Foot Act itself. Is that correct? So you didn't want to add any comments specifically to that. Is that correct?
No, I think someone would hold it. It is the accurate copy of the Foot Act.
Yep, very good. So thank you. I think speaking on behalf of all of us tonight, we really appreciate your support of OSI as well as your comments this evening.
Thank you.
So,
I'm talking to y'all.
Great, thank you. So next we have a presentation from Paul Finn about community choice aggregation. And I'd like to remind everyone that that is actually the option that is currently included in the 820 plan. And we all know it's a living plan, so that could change. But Paul, I'm going to turn things over to you, and I assume Missy is, once she's done there with her bedtime duties, but Missy's probably also going to be at the controls too.
Okay.
All right, sorry about that. Thanks, everyone. Paul, do you want me to make you a co-host and run slides, or would you like me to run your slides for you?
Sure. If I could do my slides, I did add a couple while we're talking just to be germane.
You bet. All right, I'm going to make you a co-host. So everyone, while I do that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Paul Finn. And just for the sake of time, I'll drop a link to his bio. But Paul has been instrumental since the initiation of the CCA. He was one of the original creators of community choice aggregation and helped see it evolve over time. So we have, what you'll hear about today is that community choice aggregation looks different in different states. And there's even a really great report that I'll send out, I think we've circulated before, talking about CCA 3.0, which really looks at kind of first iteration, second generation, third generation. And to make it explicit, we are really interested in the third generation concept of community choice aggregation. And I think Paul is going to give you a little bit of a preview of what that means, walking us through some of the history. So Paul, I am really appreciative of your time and your expertise. He's someone I talk to and really respect. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Thank you so much, Missy. It's totally mutual. I'm so excited about Ann Arbor and just the unique clarity of vision about the situation that I see coming from you, and I see now from this whole community of people that are, it's one of those things that occurs in a fairly small number of communities across the country. Now it is going on, but it's not that common. And so very pleased to be here and glad to meet you all. Just to quickly introduce myself, I did develop CCA starting in the early 1990s and in Massachusetts, where now I'm based. And again, went back to California, where I'm from originally, and developed CCA there in the late 1990s, and then helped develop policies and laws in different states around the country. Mostly I've been focused on working with communities that are super focused on climate action and trying to get CCA to be that for them, right? To design it so that it can deliver that outcome in a big way. And so that's involved several iterations of work from cities like San Francisco. Actually, Boulder, I worked for Boulder when they were making the decision to go for municipalization in 2010. And there's a whole story there because they asked, should we do CCA? I said, no, do municipalization. Because they didn't have any chance of passing a bill in the legislature. It was very obvious that they had no support. And they had an expiring franchise agreement. I said, well, that's a wonderful situation. It is, as Valerie said, I love your presentation, Valerie. It was a wonderful presentation on the legal background of municipalization, and just which has a lot of depth, requires a lot of depth to even understand, because it is so arcane and complex. And anyway, so I worked on with municipal utilities as well. I'm not just doing CCA stuff, really focused on decarbonization, the kind of critical pathways to really getting changes to occur. CCA is how I came up with dealing with it. But I also came up with green bonds in 2001, and I combined the green bonds with aggregation, the idea of combining aggregated procurement with municipal bonds to leverage investment in decarbonization, specifically localization or reconcentrating development behind meters into buildings, into urban areas, rather than central grid-based investment. And I do think that's where the whole Valerie's recommendation about focusing on your goals is so critical, because if you don't, you assume all the things you want are somehow associated with the pathway that you have in mind, but they aren't. And so if you don't razor sharp focus on the goal, you will not reach the goal. This is one of the main lessons for me in working with municipalities and energy, is that the means does not get you to the end. There are available means. There are different kinds of points of leverage that can get you to where you want to go. But if you only focus on the means in an ideological way, it will harm your progress to the goal. And so I've worked for all these entities in the last 10 years or so. My company is a small company. We consult for municipalities, sometimes for state governments. Most recently, I'm doing a lot of work in New York. There's a lot of activity centered around decarbonization and resilience because of all the weather events. So I said don't do CCA to Boulder, but now in 2020, they just dropped their case $20 million later. That's the downside of the critical pathway of municipalization, that you are getting into a multi-electoral cycle process. When you do so, those who vote for it will get candidates who run against them. The longer it takes you to litigate, the harder it will be for you to be reelected. And several cycles down the road, you could get extremely vulnerable to opposition from the utility. They hold all the cards. The electoral laws protect them, and they restrict you. And so it's very difficult to run political campaigns. And I say that as someone who has run political campaigns against the utilities and beat them in several cases, but particularly in Proposition 16 and 20, same year, 2010. That actually the reason why Boulder invited me there, because I was fighting PG&E in Proposition 16 in California, where they tried to beat us, and we beat them. But we beat them because we had the upper hand, that we were ahead of them with CCA. They were trying to stop us. When you try to litigate against them, they have the upper hand. They own the system. The system is designed to protect them. By comparison, I now work with the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, who became a CCA in the past 10 years. And now they're focused on building the kind of things that were mentioned earlier: building decarbonization, development of microgrids in the neighborhoods of the city, intensive energy transformation within the urban core. This is a very different strategy, behind the meter, inside of buildings, not the same as taking over the grid in order to build wind farms and solar farms, which I consider to be essentially an outmoded idea. And so are you going to buy the old infrastructure to get to utopia, or are you going to build utopia? The strategy that I strongly recommend to communities is focus investment on climate action, on decarbonization. If you buy the wires, you're buying a freeway, you're buying an old system, you're buying power plants, you're buying legal obligations of an entity that has direct revenue conflicts of interest against decarbonization. They're not just big bad corporations. They are that in many cases, but they're entities that hold debt. In order to pay the debt, they must sell power. This rule applies to public power entities equally to investor-owned utilities. And that's why municipal utilities, while there are some leaders among municipal utilities in decarbonization, they are not, as a rule, leaders in decarbonization. And I say that with great humility because I work for them, but I don't pretend that they're doing something they're not doing. The issue is, what do you own and what does it cause you to need? And so decarbonization is degrowth. It has to do with reducing the need for the use of the grid, which means the reduction in revenues that will repay the debt on the debt holders of the grid. The same applies to decarbonizing heat, which is you wouldn't want to own the gas pipelines either as a means to somehow green the heat. That in fact you want to financially strand the pipelines, financially strand the transmission assets on any kind of a rapid decarbonization pathway. And so we focus on how to use CCA or other approaches, but CCA being the most powerful I know about, to leverage finance of building decarbonization and resilience. So think about, I would encourage those, because I know you have, and I encourage and support this strong push from your community of all the callers on the phone about municipalization. That's passion. And passion is the essential ingredient in political change. So I'm not trying to discourage that in any way. I'm just saying, when you think about public power, think of it strategically, not politically. And strategically is, what leverage do you have to drive the process? I would say one major leverage you have that Valerie raised that's super important is that you can compete against the franchise holder. And that's vulnerability for the franchise holder. Apart from whether or not you actually seek to compete with a franchise holder on a retail service basis, you can compete against that's leverage, very important leverage. So the threat to do that is valuable threat. And the procedure to initiate the valuable threat is important in order to demonstrate that you're serious about it. So I would encourage you to pursue all of your legal pathways to municipalization in order to get the attention of the utility so that they might be willing to negotiate around CCA. And in fact, in Colorado, because of Boulder's municipalization efforts, the utilities there are in part suggesting that they will create an opening for CCA. So it's leverage. It's about using that leverage. But the other leverage you have, the third sub-bullet here, is local renewable energy finance. And this was was mentioned by the gentleman earlier about financing rooftop solar, behind the meter kind of energy efficiency. This is critical because you could bundle a retail service, competitive retail service without CCA in conjunction with the local renewable energy finance program based on existing law that would leverage your competitive position against the utility and cause a threatening competitive option. They don't offer public financing for customer ownership of on-site solar, do they? I don't think so. And I don't think they would want to either. So if you were to offer that, that's very intriguing at a minimum, if not menacing profoundly to the strategy groups inside the corporation. You get their cooperation, they'll help you do CCA, they'll try to find a way to work with you. Leverage is key to the game, not just which legal pathway you take in some monolithic way. So this is the path of CCA development in the past 20 years, most of it in the past 5 years, because we started in Massachusetts in the mid-90s. It took till 2000 to get California passed, and then in the meantime, several states adopted CCA. Now it's a half of the United States that has it in terms of the energy market. So that's whatever that is, 10 million Americans live inside of CCAs today. So the replication of the model is highly rapid, certainly compared to municipalization, which is, 20 small towns. We have 1,500 cities, 30 million Americans served. 150 million Americans may legally implement it today, not including Michigan, obviously. All you need is an ordinance to adopt it. It takes you 3 months to adopt it. It takes you 6 to 9 months to launch it. It takes you a year to start building local renewables. So the real appeal of it is you're not going to court for 20 years like Boulder, or 10 years at this point. You go straight to launch and you go straight to climate action. You're not acquiring the wires for 10 or 20 years in order to build wind facilities in 20 or 30 years, right? Which is really a loser strategy. If you're on a 2050 schedule, the UN schedule. That doesn't work. And so here is a 2030 schedule. That's how we present it to CCAs. This is a 2030 schedule for climate action where you could get to energy transformation at year 10, which means you demonstrate a pathway for other municipalities by 2050. We view that as the definition of leadership, not just compliance, not just complying with a carbon target or Paris Accord or something. Anyway, you can form them regionally based on joint powers agreements. You can form them locally. You file a plan with the state. And that's it. They approve you within a year. You change over service to a new entity using the poles and wires of the old utility. So 1,500 cities today, the opportunity of the savings that they've demonstrated, which they have consistently, and nobody denies this in any of the states that have, including conservative states like Ohio, they save consumers money on their bills. But many CCAs in the past 10 years are reinvesting that money in local renewables. They take the margins from the market savings and they apply them to local investment. This is a business model for decarbonization, not an abstract acquisition of infrastructure to later potentially invest what funds into renewable energy or decarbonizing the grid that's just been purchased, which will actually reduce revenue on that grid. This is a positive virtual cycle to invest in degrowth behind the grid, which indeed strands the grids and pipelines, reduces the debt service on those pipelines, and rededicates them to new local investments. CCAs are persuasive to a broad array of policymakers because they fix energy markets. They not only allow innovation within communities like Ann Arbor that want to innovate, that want to lead and demonstrate pathways, but they also place competitive pressure on the utilities to play a cleaner game, which right now in almost all states in the US is very, very dirty. They play pretty much lowball, shark in the pool, poker with everybody, including regulators, municipalities, everyone. And so it creates pressure that's just not there normally in the marketplace, and causes companies like PG&E to do community solar, local investment, microgrids, batteries, all kinds of stuff. They were not doing that until CCA formed in California, which basically has taken over California. So you have a local democratic process, very simple with an ordinance. You have a one-year launch process. And you have opt-out notices so consumers know they're being switched over. If they don't like it, they can opt out. So there's no force of the consumer. 85 to 90% on average customers do consent to enrollment. So it's a very successful enrollment system. There are no problems with 30 million consumers served with that process, even though some politicians will claim that it's controversial. It's not controversial with consumers, given there are other real options. And you could start financing within 1 year. That's the main issue. That investment, the actual causes carbon reductions to occur, can happen quickly. It just requires the local political decisions to use the CCA that way so that it happens. You're looking at making new investments rather than acquiring old investments. You get compliance from the regulator. You have some oversight but not approval of what you're doing. You manage your energy procurement. You manage your data, and you manage yourself fiscally as local enterprises. You manage local finance, customer service, and accounts, and a customer web account. That's how you mostly relate to consumers, is through a web account. So the money to pay for programs can come from CCA revenue. For most CCAs in America, the amount of revenue in the CCA exceeds the discretionary portion of your general fund. It's a very large economic development fund that's captured from being a CCA, just from the electricity. If you also are a CCA for other things like heat, for example, which many are, you triple, quadruple that amount. You're now into 4 or 5 times your discretionary general funds that are under management just by becoming a CCA. You have the ability to place adders, bill adders that pay for your local municipal programs, your CCA programs, pay for projects, pay for voluntary customer participation in projects like the on-site solar that Mark Clevey mentioned, local microgrids, community microgrids. You're able to organize these things on the platform of the CCA. Otherwise, it's just a matter of using that public power, traditional public power public finance power that you already have under separate organic local law to finance these. So as you have to control the revenue and the rates that the CCA gives you, then you get, or frankly, a direct competition with utilities, provided you acknowledge the issue that customers can leave you tomorrow, the need to commit the customer. The CCA helps you kind of get more sticky with the customer for a more long-term relationship. But otherwise, you have options here to use local authority. The CCA just gives you the kind of nuke button where you control the whole game now, right? And you control it through a statutory process, not through a litigation process. So, you know, it can either just be your town alone, it can be a regional entity, it can be run by one town, but participated in by regional towns. So if one town like Ann Arbor wants to take on the responsibility of doing all the work and sort of leading the process, and then the other suburban towns can go along with it and sign on to it, and that's about a common pattern. The model has evolved. I started this in 1993, wrote the first version in Massachusetts in 95. I wrote a second version in California, actually in 2004. 2010 is when we really formally introduced it, and it started spreading there. And then since the last 5 years, working on a 3.0 model that Missy mentioned. So 1.0 was real stripped down version, legally greener, cheaper. You just buying power from the grid. You buy renewable energy certificates. Maybe you source from a wind farm, a solar farm, but you're not building anything. You're just buying power. It's greener, and so you're legally greener. You didn't actually change anything. You didn't add any new resources onto the grid. You didn't subtract any demand from within buildings, but you're sourcing from green supply. So there's a marginal benefit. That's like 1995 to 2000. This is Massachusetts today, where I am. Actually, it's bigger now. It's half the state. It's 150 out of 300 cities, including Boston, Worcester, and Springfield's about to launch. 150 cities, so there's increasing focus on renewable energy. Illinois has had CCA for 5 years. They have had significant renewable energy activity, but all centered around renewable energy certificates. So again, nothing real, all kind of legal, but lots of record setters on green power. So this was the equivalent of over 1 million vehicles off the road just from these purchases. Ohio, over half the state is a CCA. A lot of the new activity there is also focused on green energy. But it was really, for me, disappointing. And so we started focusing on how to really get more carbon benefit in the late 1990s. We developed 2.0, moving from a mitigation model of the kind of what you get today in the market based on credits to really changing over to new assets, building solar farms, building wind farms, building local battery, building local renewable energy. And so today, California really has produced this big move. And the reason you really know about CCA, because it was obscure before California, is that almost all the 100% renewable energy cities in America are California CCA 2.0 programs, 67 out of 72. That's the whole movement, right? And it was opened up by the fact that the CCs in California focused on building local renewable energy using the power of CCA to build. So big success. They're expecting, actually the number's up from 35% of all of California. It's up to 40, above 40. So it's like 12, 13 million people in California under CCA, under 180 municipalities inside of 20 regional CCAs. And so they're forecasted to grow to 85% of the state. So that'll be like, whatever, 25 million people. They've driven on the right side here, 5 gigawatts of new in-state renewable development in the past 3 years. So that's billions of dollars of development by those entities. They've driven renewable energy levels above state requirements. They've driven carbon reductions far beyond state requirements. It's really kind of revolutionized the state. And I'm not saying it's a model, because it's not. It's the old model. This is from 2004, but it happened, right? And it had a big impact. Physically greener power. But we've taken it in the past 7 years to what we call 3.0. And that's focused really on what Mark Clevey said on its radical decarbonization. It isn't greening the grid, which for a variety of ways I could explain to you later is really ineffective at decarbonization. to what we call, that's an addition, what they call an additionality model. We're adding wind farms, adding solar farms onto the grid, building new grid to those solar farms, building new grid. Well, new carbon comes with a new grid. And when you build new grid with new carbon, new fossil plants backfill the capacity on those power lines. So you get more carbon. And because of the 20% to 30% capacity factor efficiency of renewables, as they only work 20 to 30% of the time in best conditions, you have 70 to 80% unused lines when they build a new line. So you have this problem with centralized green grid solutions where you never really get out of a carbon intensive energy mix when you build onto the grid. When you build into buildings, into urban core, and you decarbonize and you integrate energy and distributed energy resources, which I call here DERs, I hope you know that term, that's a different game. Every dollar you invest is deleting demand from the grid and the pipeline. Every penny that you invest deletes demand. That investment is decarbonization. Acquiring a grid is not. And again, I'm not trying to discourage the public power people. CCA is public power. American Public Power Association calls it public power. It's just a more modernized approach to how you use public power to change the game, to transform energy, not just take it over. So here's the kind of program complexity that is involved in that process. It has to do with engaging people in their homes and their businesses, not just building big government assets. It has to do with changing homes and businesses. 95% of the energy load in Ann Arbor is private sector load. So you've got to get into buildings. You have to enlist customer investment. If you look at these categories, this is from California CCA Association. This is a year ago, okay? This is slide 1. You see there are 15 or 20 different programs outlined here along the left side and on the right side. Here's slide 2. We're 30, 40 different program elements that are involved in decarbonization in a community. So the CCA opens up this highly diversified services market for the local community that's administered by the community and controlled by it directly, but it's not taking over the poles and wires and power plants to get there. It's just reaching into the authority that it has with the CCA to make that happen. And again, I think you could do a lot of this without CCA, just using your non-exclusive franchise provision. So the CCA would open it up so you cover everybody. I think you have a potential 2-level strategy here to just go down that highway of we're going to blow you up and have a second off-ramp that says, if you let us, we won't kill you. And so here's upstate New York or New Jersey starting up CCA. I'm going to try to go faster, and that's New York, a weird orientation to capture the major CCAs in New York and New Jersey. I'm going to click through here so you don't have to wait. New York recognized CCA as a distributed energy resource development platform 7 years ago. That's partly why I moved back to the East Coast and worked on this toolkit to do that for the state of New York. Ohio's now looking at some really innovative aggregations. Ohio are doing local decarbonization, including local carbon taxes, municipal building, retrofits. We completed this 3.0 program about a year ago, and it's our version 3, and we've been working with City of Cambridge and some other towns around the country that really are super focused on decarbonization as a critical pathway, and just seeing the lever for what it is. So the issue is, again, the green grid's not good enough. I'm going to move quickly through this stuff. You have to move to decentralized energy, to building automation, to building storage, to community micro districts, to things that are really off grid, where you don't want to be taking over those assets. You're trying to basically strand them and reduce the use of them because they are inherently carbon intensive. So, you're looking at distributed energy resources, DERs. That has, by an exponential factor, a greater carbon impact than any centralized investment. This is a work that we did for CCA, San Francisco CCA, looking at, based on big data, very detailed data, how much decarbonization, localization. This is each slice that you see on the left there is a day and a year for the city of San Francisco, combined load of the whole community. It's about 1 megawatt. And the right side is 5,000 developments of on building renewables that we identified through the data, $1 billion of investment, and that's what happens to that daily load in that community. That is a picture of decarbonization. That's what it looks like. not some kind of abstraction through the grid, not some kind of political strategy that gets there somehow in 20 years. It's by getting at that target, just attacking it. So these are the three models, from mitigation to donation, which is the 2.0, you invest money into local development. 3.0 is based on equity. It's about literally giving the system to the customers, using their monthly bills, rededicating their monthly bills to things that they are going to own in their buildings, or if it can't be in their building, based on location, on their block, in their neighborhood, extremely local activities. It uses not just the CCA as a structure, but the local government, the light blue, the municipality, which, as Valerie said, has the billing system. It has resources. It has communication systems, things that actually market players, energy companies do not have. Connection to the end users, the trust of the end users to engage them. Things like your curbside recycling program, where people volunteer to separate their plastic and their paper. They don't do it because it's a product. They don't do it because the government owns it or some government scheme. They do it because it's a community initiative that is being managed in a trustworthy way by the city. And so to use customers, and we use cooperatives in the model and a share system based on the community solar system to engage the community in an effective way, the active elements of the community, but also the whole community, to engage also the local private sector and the jobs and in the contracts to build the stuff, to develop the stuff, to mobilize the whole community, not just the government in litigation, again, just to make that point and drive it home, not just to litigate until you win, but to engage broadly the whole community, to enlist them in an investment, a voluntary investment in part. So I'm going to try to wrap up. I think I'm taking too much time. But again, this is the kind of paradigm comparison. And I'm going to slip through it here. It's revenue stream that you're grabbing when you do a CCA, right? And I mentioned larger than the discretionary general fund. The importance there is that the missing component in the renewable energy industry is long-term contracts. The entire industry is rich in credit. You can go out and go to Goldman Sachs. They'll give you $1 billion to build whatever you want, but you have to give them a 20-year contract. If you have a 20-year contract, you can do whatever you want. CCA gives you the 20-year contract. And you don't need Goldman Sachs anymore. Now you can go to local banks. You can issue green bonds. You can go to the local co-op or to the credit union, better, more progressive financiers, because you don't need the banks to do everything. In the current environment, you always need the banks to do everything, and therefore they control everything. So this basically brings that control local, so you have more leverage to go to the other counterparties, whether it's the utility or a bank or an energy company, and not just be begging, which is basically what municipalities usually do. They beg with no leverage, no ideas, no setup, no preparation. And here's the development process. It uses the local municipal relationship with the CCA. The CCA is able to get all the customer data when it's a CCA from the utility, formerly only held by the utility. That enables you to figure out analytically, based on a database, what kinds of facilities could be built in any given building in the entire community, and then to contact the owners of those buildings and the residents of those buildings and ask them if they're interested in participating. This kind of approach, what we call throwing the net wide approach, nets the whole community. And therefore, even if you only enlist 5% of the community, you will have yourself a multi-$10 million or $100 million build out from that, compared to what you can get today based on voluntary programs or utility sourcing. The access to data and the ability to find the customers and communicate with them in a trusted way as a municipality, which no utility can do. Even the CCA itself as an agency can't do, but each town can do, does routinely do. That's the pathway. And so you have this circular economy that you set up between the CCA, the municipality, the user, and local businesses to redevelop your neighborhoods. That's essentially what this is. It's a redevelopment model through a partly in-sourced development process. And so you're engaging people in microgrid development. And this is where you don't need the grid and you don't need to acquire the grid anymore because of the technological innovation of microgrids, but also the cheapness of photovoltaics, which is now extreme, shocking, and the cheapness of storage media, which are already cheap in the form of lithium batteries if they are inside of electric vehicles, which they should be, and we incorporate into storage models. Not so much the stationary batteries, which are very expensive and don't have much energy capacity in them, but the ability to integrate storage into buildings, which involves integration of heat and hot water and other resources in those buildings, not just electricity. So you have CCAs that provide heating services, not just electricity services. With the advent of the electric vehicle and hydrogen, energy is broken open. The siloing of energy between electricity and other sources is obsolete. And so the ability to develop microgrids that include all of these energy sources is currently commercially viable. There's nothing preventing you from developing the resource. They are cost effective. And so here's a quick toy image of what I'm talking about. Appliance automation, microgrids, air conditioning, heating systems, on-site renewable energy, hot water systems. This is essentially a single system. And the 3.0 model is totally razor focused on this outcome. But again, a local program that uses your competitive franchise option with financing can do this as well. It's just a matter of local program design and effective community engagement to make that happen. The CCA has the advantage of an opt-out enrollment that can capture everybody, which you don't get from a single customer approach. But here's the targeting of the asset. You know, you look at the community as a bunch of energy consuming organisms. There's clusters of demand, clusters, you know, whether it's multi-use neighborhoods, high energy intensity buildings, critical energy facilities like schools and city hall, and private sector critical energy facilities like grocery stores and places that use lots of energy that need it. And you focus in those areas and you engage people based on their need for those resources. Again, using the data, not just a bland marketing program, but data. What you put in front of them is the opportunity to develop all these resources in their buildings. That is, you're not just offering power or green power. You're not just offering solar panels. You're not just offering batteries. You're not just offering new appliances that can be automated to work with those systems. You're offering a whole platform of technology that works interoperably, that essentially strategically removes demand from the grid, and by doing so radically decarbonizes the grid. Does not export back onto the grid, but is load avoiding. It's essentially minimizing the need for whole city blocks to go down to 80, 90% off grid. And this is commercially viable today, economically viable today. It has to be adapted to the market, but to the extent that you are able to incorporate heating systems, the heating costs can be very high. The automobile fuel costs are also very high compared to power. So when you integrate these different energy resources into a financial asset like a microgrid, the price points move, the targets move. And so you gain all these competitive advantages by integrating these resources. Here's just I'm almost finished here. This is like the crazy idea we came up for Michigan for you to think about just conceptually. I'll just let you look at it for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You have capacity in your town based on political will, intellectual capital, and some general funds, funding, you know, NGOs that pay attention to you and support you. Other communities around you and all across America and the world have nothing. They didn't have anything when the economy was doing well. So that's why we focus on towns like you. You actually are the most positioned to lead this kind of initiative in the United States and in the world. You actually have some bandwidth and some desire and some passion in the community. So you can partner with communities around you that would follow if they just had a path, but they don't have the money, they don't have the time. And it's about using that leverage, that intellectual capacity to make it happen. Thank you so much.
Paul, thank you very, very much. We've got several people with questions, but I want to ask one first. And that was a great slide deck. It's on our city website for all of us to be able to dig into. I'm just wondering if there is a 2-hour, 3-hour version of what you gave us tonight with all of the details on YouTube, for example, that we could access.
Yes, there is. If you go to localgreennewdeal.org is our project website. Local Green New Deal. We're calling this a local Green New Deal because that's essentially what it is.
Yep.
And then localpower.com. There are other PowerPoints there and webinars. I give webinars for free at request as a part of our project. So I'm available to give more detailed webinars to all of you or any of you individually, to local groups that are interested or curious. So it's part of our project to do that, and be happy to do that.
Great. So I think Zoom feeds me hands up according to when they were raised. I think Jay goes first, and then Mark, and then Ember. Go ahead, Jay.
I may have been last, but I'll go first anyway. So just, I guess, speaking of leverage, I mean, I'm definitely all in on the idea of distributed generation, but I believe in Michigan, I don't know the details of it, but we've got a 1% cap on distributed generation at the state level. And where if we can't remove that 1% cap, we can go gangbusters till we hit 1%, but how does that fit together? I mean, how do those two things fit?
Great question. It's a key factor across the country because you have different levels of cap across the country, across the world. And that's where we got into some slides I had to skip through quickly, but this microgrid design that I mentioned earlier, actually I'll just share it just so you can see it while I'm talking, is specifically designed to overcome that problem. Because the key issue with the reason that there are caps on these systems is that the systems cause impacts on the grid. And the reason they cause impacts on the grid is that they export power onto the grid. Oh dear. So the issue is power export. And when you export, the transformer often has to be upgraded. The local distribution feeders have to be upgraded. And the result is ultimately that the utility has to pay for those upgrades, and they transfer them on to all customers in their rate base. They go to the state regulator and say, look, we're having to charge all the low-income ratepayers to pay for these affluent people putting solar or microgrid in their buildings. And of course, the regulators agree to cap it. It's a logical thing that they would cap it because the costs have to be borne by the other ratepayers to export the energy. So this microgrid design that we have developed for CCA 3.0, we developed it commercially. This is not just a conceptual design. This is a commercial design. This is a non-exporting system. Not 1 watt will ever go back on the grid. In fact, we do not apply for permits for exporting onto the grid. This facility is powering itself. It's using the grid for backup only. It's not net metering. It's not using a feed-in tariff, virtual net metering, or any other transactive tariff offered by the utility under the Public Service Commission. For that reason, the utility has no ability to block or limit the proliferation of this microgrid. That's why it's designed this way. This can penetrate to 100% of the grid, and there's nothing the utility can do about it.
Perfect.
That's why it's designed this way. Yep.
Mark, Ember, and then Chuck.
Sure. And I think I'll just add that I think the 1% cap is actually for each utility. So, right, so consumers increase theirs to 2%.
Voluntarily, they
yeah,
did.
it's a voluntary 1%, and so consumers increase theirs, the UP utility increased theirs, and so just it's not only, or it's not exclusively 1%. But what I was going to say is that yeah, I appreciated specifically your points about how there's value in still pursuing like a feasibility study and municipalization in tandem with this. I think a big thing that I've been saying for a while now is that we have to like stop perpetuating the false dichotomy between these two things, especially as we seek to pursue energy democracy as a value, and that we should, especially at this stage, be pursuing both options. And I guess my question was, I mean, you mentioned don't do politics, but I wish we could say that to DTE, our investor-owned utilities, because my understanding is that in Michigan, in order to get CCA, this has to be passed by our state legislature. And I think that's my biggest concern with it, is that, our very own our very own reps, state rep and state senator, have said that they have very little faith in this passing in the state legislature because even if the House flips to Democrat, DTE has their pockets so deep in people across the aisles. And so it seemed to me earlier in the presentation you were proposing that this could be done through a city ordinance, which was completely new to me. So I'm just wondering, like, if I understood that correctly, and if you could clarify if that's the legal context in the state in Michigan, because my understanding is that that's the challenge there. And I think we were really clear about the challenges faced by municipalization today. And it seemed like the presentation kind of glossed over the big challenges that are faced by CCA as well. So I think we need to acknowledge the challenges in achieving both of those different strategies.
Yes, no, you do. You have to pass a law through the legislature. And that's where you would have to have some leverage. I would encourage you to, actually, what I would encourage you to do is not to fund a feasibility study, but actually to implement a local competitive service. Don't study it, just implement it. The most persuasive case to the utility to get them to cooperate, and cooperation would be to allow you to have a CCA law, would be initiate a service to compete directly against them. And then request their support for legislature and the legislature. If you do a feasibility study, they know that is a kicking of the can down the road. They know that that's a 3-year process leading to 10 years of litigation. If you start a local a service to compete directly with them and start picking off their high value customers, their large commercial customers, institutional, the university, anybody you can pick off of commercial service that's a large high value customer, they will talk regarding your legislation. If you do a feasibility study, they'll just laugh. And so they know where that leads. They know what that is. You know what I mean? It's nothing. And the point is that you don't need to take over the grid. The feasibility study is all about evaluating the grid. This is what held up Boulder. Good friends of mine. 10 years later, they've quit their jobs. They gave up. They left because it went nowhere 10 years later. They won the political vote 10 years ago. They won at the box office. All the voters approved this. Then they got a second vote approving the use of financing to take it over. They still lost in litigation. You have to look at the actual history that Valerie was talking about. It's very bleak. And so your option is not to study. Your option is to implement. You have the legal right to compete against them on a retail service basis. Don't study it, do it. And just by creating the legal fact of that action, even without starting service, you just announce that you're creating the service. You announce to local businesses that you wish to organize a service based on competitive options. Those options don't need supply through their grid based on the microgrid that I just showed you. You don't need the grid to serve them. So you don't need to acquire it. You can provide service without using their grid. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so I'm not here to say do CCA, not municipal utilities. I'm here to say go for the juggler. And that is the juggler. The juggler is retail service. And if they, at that point, they will either say, this is war, we're going to kill you, or they'll say, all right, let's talk about the CCA bill. Let's parcelize this. Let's put this in a box. And that's what CCA would at that point represent to them. You're not going to kill them. You're just going to take over their retail electric service inside the city, and you're going to build distributed assets inside the community, inside of buildings. So I've probably overstuffed to answer your question. I'm agreeing with what you're saying, and I do want to support the municipalization trajectory, but I also think feasibility study is a very stodgy old idea for what to do. This is like 1937, and no one's done it since 1937. CCA is a tenth of the United States. Microgrids are just hitting the market right now. I mean, there are hundreds of them online, but they're about to destroy the electric utility industry unless the electric utility industry can manage to somehow wrest control of it and maintain ownership and control of that phenomenon. But as a technology, localization is here. It's just a matter of being able to set up a stable contracting environment to finance it. And so that's all you need to focus on doing is setting up that. And that is CCA, that is direct service for retail customers, and that is municipal revenue bonds, green bonds.
Chair Murphy, if I can jump in too, I just thought I would share that we're working with Senator Irwin, and we actually have our first piece of CCA legislation as well. So we're gonna, I think similarly, the strategy of the office is to pull on all of these strings at the same time and see where we can get leverage to Paul's point. So I just wanted to share that that's moving.
Thanks for jumping in. Mark.
Well, I'm going to take you up on the webinar, so you'll be hearing from me.
Hey, okay. I look forward to it.
You bet. So my question is the relationship between CCA and electric choice. So Michigan started doing electric choice in the 90s, and we've capped it. But, all of our major GM, Ford, Chrysler, all our big companies all have electric choice now. So to simplify this, is CCA 2.0 simply electric choice for green power, or is there some fundamental difference between electric choice and CCA? I guess I want to lead into it. Is there a way that we can leverage our electric choice program in Michigan and shove CCA into it, or use that as leverage to get this thing through the legislature? Because I think we've got solar taxation passed, and by linking up with the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum, which is a really interesting group of people. A lot of their friends and neighbors are militia people, but either way, they got taxation done. So I think this is not as hard of a lift as we think it is from the legislative point. That doesn't bother me.
CCA got through Ohio, Mark. That was Republican.
Right.
And we've.
I think it's electric choice. We have electric. Is these two different animals, or is there some compatibility?
They're sort of like half cousins. It is legally a form of electric choice, so it falls under the same laws that carved out, that basically removed monopoly protection for energy sourcing revenue requirements for the utilities.
Okay.
It kept their revenue requirements for transmission, right? But not for generation. And so it's sort of, you could say it sort of definanced their transmission. And their
your 2.0 model, the 2.0 model was basically electric choice then?
Well, 1.0 is electric choice.
1.0 is electric choice, okay.
That was 1995. 2.0 was like 2004. That was use electric choice to build, to build local renewable generators.
Okay,
so
new capacity.
That's
Okay.
California, 5 gigawatts later.
Right.
And so those agencies aren't just buying power. They are actually going straight to developers and getting them to develop new assets and commit those assets to that community for 20 years into the future. And so they're setting up that, what Valerie was talking about, the original basis of the franchise, which is a kind of monopoly. But the CCA takes on control of that through a flexible instrument, which is the opt-out enrollment. So it's not a monopoly, but it's very sticky choice. It's a sticky choice enrollment platform where unless you object actively, you will be enrolled. And so the city council decides in an ordinance, the customers are notified vigorously in 3 consecutive electric bill inserts, and then they're enrolled. And so unless they send back a checked envelope. And so it's sort of in between. It's like a half cousin, It's it's not like Republican pure choice where only the sharks survive, but instead it's a community choice where everybody benefits. But it's not choice in that pure sense of each consumer gets to decide what he's going to choose. It's sort of like postmodern choice where you realize that you don't actually have choices. And so you're creating a choice in a world without choices, and which is an alternative to the monopoly. And people can opt out, but they're just going to stay with the monopoly, right? Why would they do that? And that's what we have in California. So
I just want to remind people that we have an expert on aggregation and microgrids and stuff like that in Chuck. And 3 years ago, Chuck invited the members of this council to drive down to Jackson and tour the microgrid facility down there and get the briefing. And we have yet to do that. So we've got 2 people who work for Consumers Energy that is really interested, works with Consumers Energy, and Teresa works for them. And they're doing microgrids in Michigan right now. It's just DTE's territory that is not doing microgrids.
I think it really is the future. Because it gets you around the need to fight over the grid. You don't need to fight over the grid. So then it's just a matter of can you put together the other pieces based on existing law behind the grid? Can you use the special relationship that a municipality has to each building occupant that no one else has? A trusted, non-commercial relationship. That is golden. And so it's just about using that and then to logistically organize the microgrids. And I think I'd love to hear Chuck's strategy. Maybe we could, if he's interested, he could participate in the webinar or whatever, we could get into it. Because I really think if you don't understand microgrids, which includes, by the way, not just the microgrid per se as a circuit behind the interconnect, but it also includes building automation, storage, other things, appliance automation, heating automation, fuel switching, electric vehicles, hydrogen. There's a lot of angles inside of that. It's a whole kind of new universe of technologies that are opened up by the initiative, where every dollar you spend is going to be on those essentially megawatt hour producing, negatherm producing, negative carbon causing investments, as opposed to this abstract pathway.
Chuck, you want to jump in?
Love it. Thank you.
Cheers, Mark.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Well, I don't know how to respond because it's going to take me a couple hours, and I think everybody will be in bed by the time I'm done, one way or another. I could speak on the subject for a long time. We do have operating microgrids. I have lots of friends, Bronzeville and Chicago. I could talk about that one. Paul, you mentioned you have one that's commercially available. So I'm just going to offer a question, which is, could you advise on the name of that facility? And then we can talk about this later sometime when we all have some more beneficial time.
I don't have a facility. All I have is a specification for a microgrid that includes commercial components. We developed the CC 3.0 microgrid, the diagram I showed you last year, and we organized a consortium late last year. And so now we're basically advising CCAs on how to develop those assets programmatically, because the main challenge is programmatic. Which is how do you provide not just power, but heat, hot water, vehicles? How do you engage everyone in a building? How do you engage most of the people in a city block? How do you put it on the bill? How do you effectively transact investments between multiple parties? How do you incorporate public finance? So it's very much a model in development, not a product that's on the market today that I'm talking about. But the non-exporting microgrid, though, I said it was commercially viable. It's a commercial business model. It's not a conceptual business model, is what I meant by that. Not that it's out there operating and we have microgrids in operation. We don't.
Yep. By the way, now would be a great time to visit our microgrid in Jackson, because the people in the building can't go to work with COVID. So we could all kind of trudge around there and probably get away with it. But someday we'll get there. It's a pretty cool facility. I'll share more if anybody has questions on how we operate.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Some other time we'll talk more.
Great.
Any other questions? I have a quick one. My understanding is that microgrids are also not allowed in the state of Michigan. They can't cross a property line, but I think legislation has been introduced to change that. Can somebody else confirm that? Looks like Mark shaking his head. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's true in California. That's true in most states. And this microgrid does not cross property lines.
Right.
So we've designed program designs for microgrids in California as well as in New York, which is where we're focused today. Mm-hmm. And in all cases, that's where the data comes in, John. That essentially the approach to development is, again, not marketing based, where you say who wants a microgrid, sign up and get a microgrid. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's look at the customer usage data. The CCA law will allow you to get that data. That's the one thing you won't have trying to offer retail service. It makes it very difficult to offer retail service to competitively. because then you have to go to their door and ask them for a copy of the bill and do this sort of draconian, slow approach. Well, with the CCA law, you get a data dump of the whole utility record for every customer. And so we've been modeling that data for the city of San Francisco, for Sonoma County, other jurisdictions for quite a few years now in order to identify clusters of buildings which are both contiguous and not crossing a public right of way, and have an ownership structure that could accommodate an integrated microgrid. So it's really about targeting to avoid rights of way. And again, that relationship with building owners and building occupants to enlist them, because those are the processes that really get in the way of commercial development of microgrids. That they'll tend to start with the building where somebody knows someone who wants a microgrid. You already picked a bad building because only one in maybe half or quarter of buildings are really going to be good sites for microgrids. And ultimately the optimal sites are 10 to 20% that would really scream with a microgrid, because it has to do with the energy intensity in the building, the amount of revenue going through the meter, so therefore the return on investment, the paybacks in the meter, the energy critical factors that add value to having the presence of a microgrid. These have to be identified by data, not by who knows somebody who likes microgrids. And so it's really about a municipal redevelopment process that's data rich, privileged, not market-based, but privileged, government-based, that leads market development and focuses it and engages people to participate in it. And therefore is not limited by what's called the over-the-fence transaction rule that's applied in many states, where you can't cross a public right-of-way. And there are lots of other kind of details, sub-details within that, but that's, I guess, the general answer to that.
Good application of the old 80-20 rule, right?
Yeah, right.
80% of the benefit and 20% of the cases. Yep. Jay, go ahead.
I guess I just have a corollary or complementary to it. I like the idea of them going for the biggest customers, the biggest bang, going for the jugular. That also, requires some amount of legislation and data and big, things like that. So the opposite side of the equation is the death by 1,000 cuts that we could promote legally right now, putting solar and backup battery non-grid tied on every single family residence or something, and taking it off behind every little meter. So it seems like we could come at it from multiple tacks. That seems like something that's legal, and there's nothing against that right now. It's just a matter of promoting it.
I agree. I really think that's the most persuasive case. It focuses the city council on constructive activity. It would confront the utility and compel cooperation. It's a critical path thing. It gets you down. It gets you going down the road versus a feasibility study, which is wait for a year, wait for another year. It's 3 years. Now half your city council's gone. Do they still have the votes for this? If the utility got pissed off, did they run candidates against your city council? It's not unthinkable that they will. And so then you will get, and that happened in Boulder. Part of the reason it fell apart in Boulder is that you got new members who were against municipalization. And guess who supported them? It's really hard to track that stuff too, because of the election laws. And so, and the utilities play dirtier than anyone, other than maybe the oil industry. They're filthy, and they will just do whatever to get rid of you and stall you out. And so focusing on the positive, also it helps the public, because the public is easily distracted. And if you get into this public power now kind of ideological communist revolution rhetoric, it goes far with people like me, but it doesn't really last that well in the public forum. And after a while, they just get sick of it, particularly after there's 5 or 10 years of litigation and nothing happened. And they're like, screw this. And that's what happened in Boulder. So you have this kind of excitement for burst of political activity, followed by nothing, followed by disillusionment and loss of support. And that's the pattern. It isn't that people haven't tried. It's that it's not really a great path. The great path is, in your case, is that you have a non-exclusive franchise. That is a license to punch somebody, and you should. But the other side is to be reasonable. And actually the CCA approach becomes the reasonable option. I'm a reasonable person. Why don't you support my bill in the legislature? And if they support your bill, it will pass in 1 year.
Okay, if I can just quickly jump in, we won't punch anyone, Paul, don't worry about that. Commissioner Zucker, to your point, I think the idea of massive decentralization, right, is the Solarize program is one mechanism that's doing that. And we are closing in. Julie, if she's listening, is going to lose her mind when I say this out loud because she's nervous about it. But we're almost at 1 megawatt in the first year of the program, of rooftop solar being installed in a single year through a, complete voluntary program. And so let's just hammer that too, because those to me become assets that we have, and then we can start sort of moving forward. So I think the death by 1,000 slices or 1,000 cuts is also part of the strategy. So I just wanted to draw attention to that too.
Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive. And if you have that capacity now, then think what you could do if you decided to do citywide universal service. You said, we're going to offer service to anyone. And, call us and we'll figure out a solution for you. And that way you don't have to prefab it. And you build up a list of subscribers, and you go to DTE and say, look, I don't know, I got 6,000 people want to subscribe systems here. I think we're going to eat a hole in you. Why don't you let us do CCA? Otherwise, you're just going to disappear. It's very constructive to keep on the offense. And the feasibility study approach puts you on the defense, because then you put a study, and the study says, it'll only cost 20, 30, 40 million dollars to acquire the system. I don't know the numbers there. DTE lawyer comes back and said, actually, it's 10 times that. That's what happened in Boulder. Actually, it's 10 times that. In the newspaper, it says, Ann Arbor says 20 million. DTE says 300 million. Who do you believe? DTE that then does a mail campaign. Do you trust your government? $10 million later, they don't trust you anymore. And so it's just, you get into this nasty fight where it puts you on the defensive to prove that a litigation court will decide that you were right and that it's $20 million, not 200. Total speculation. No one knows the answer. It's bad politics. But if you say, look, we're decarbonizing, we'll offer service to anyone, we'll finance you, call us and we'll set up the details. I mean, there you go. You're there. It's all positive. People are engaged in action. The utility can try to block you, but then they look like they're in the defensive. They're the jerks now, not you. They have to prove what you're doing will somehow harm someone, not you. You just do what you're doing based on what everyone wants to have happen. So it's just much better energy and better politics and more sustainable. And again, this is not just CCA I'm talking about. It's just going for the juggler. It's going for what you can do now. And that's this unlimited, this non-exclusive franchise, the CCA option then being the box that in which everyone can peacefully relate. And so now you're just saying, I'm feeling crazy here. I'm going to punch somebody, and just, put me in the box. I'll be nice.
Paul, I think we're going to end on that note, because we have a couple of other agenda items, including what are our future meetings going to be, and maybe that will include Paul Fenn round 2.
I would love that. I would love that. I will leave you here. It's been a sincere pleasure to meet you all. I hope I wasn't too bombastic.
Thanks very much. We really appreciate your time. And like I said, or like Mark said, I'm sure you're going to get another phone call or two from people listening in tonight or participating tonight. So thanks again.
I hope so. Thank you, John. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. So thanks everybody for your time this evening. We're going to compete with a short council meeting tonight, I think. So we have another thing on the agenda, important one, and I'll turn things over to Missy to guide us through that. Did I see her? There she is, right in the middle, right on the screen below me. Missy, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you everyone who voted. So we have 12 commissioner votes in out of 15 commissioners. So just want to name that. And so far what I did is basically a line of 50%. If 6 or more commissioners voted for a topic, that was sort of the initial, like, we definitely have to cover this. And then that we can obviously add more in. So the last commissioner voted during this commission meeting. So this is real-time analysis here. You know who you are. Here are the topics that have 6 or more votes in no particular order. They just hit that cut. They're in alphabetical order, not in scoring order. Community choice aggregation, community solar, DTE's voluntary green pricing program, energy efficiency, an energy grid series, understanding how a grid works, geothermal energy, on-site solar, state level energy related legislation and regulation, and virtual power purchase agreements. So those were the topics. That's 9 that emerged from discussion. And so I think perhaps what might be best is if I know who voted and who didn't, I can follow up with the 3 other commissioners just to make sure their votes are counted in that system. And then we'll do, I think we'll try to work through as many as we can work through. We'll prioritize where we got a 9. The highest vote is a 9 out of 12. So we'll work through 9, 8, 7, 6 to make sure that those topics, barring of course other people's schedules. So thanks everyone. Reactions? Anything you want to share about
I have
that?
a question of everybody. I mean, we just had fairly detailed presentations on the legislative framework that we're operating in by Valerie and now CCA by Paul. Do people feel, at least at this point, that another round of that is necessary, or that we want to move on to the other topics? Does anybody feel strongly about additional information with regards to either one of those topics?
I'll get
Yeah, go ahead.
Commissioner McCulloug's voice because she recommended the state level legislation, and I think it's bigger than the Foot Act.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Bridget. And that's true. There's a lot more going on than just the Foot Act. That's true. Go ahead, Bridget.
Yeah, so the presentations are great, and there's no limit to how much we can learn or talk about or have presentations on in the energy area. I think I'm having the last couple of meetings presentations, and I've attended some outside webinars that I know a bunch of you have as well. I guess I'm also wondering what next steps are. So we're getting presentations, but we've had so many people call in interested in seeing something happen and change. As much as presentations are very interesting, I would be interested in putting aside time to talk about, so what are we going to do next to move forward on something?
Does anybody want to add to that? Mark?
I agree that we're an advisory body. We're not here to be, I love the briefings and I want to continue them, but I think we should be doing some things in parallel. I guess, Missy, my question to you is, Paul said that you begin the CCA process with some sort of resolution that leads to an ordinance. So is the Energy Commission the source of that resolution? Or, should we draft an ordinance? We've done 2 ordinances that look pretty good. Is this something can we start moving this ball forward?
Yeah, so we would have to have enabling legislation from the state to move forward. So what we certainly could do is, it's up to the body in terms of where you want to go. But if we are going to work with Senator Irwin on the legislation, I imagine like a ordinance of support for that going forward would certainly be warranted. I don't know what the timeline is for introduction of that legislation, but we can't. Let me just back this up. Mark, are you asking about pure CCA or what he was saying about the parallel operating space?
I guess I'm not sure. What he said was, here's the steps, and you need a resolution and an ordinance. So I'm not sure if we need an ordinance, but if we think that Ann Arbor should pursue this, we don't need the state legislature for us to pass a resolution and for the city to say, it's pending approval of legislation. We're ready to move. If we can start moving our side. I don't need a legislation to be passed before we start.
Yeah.
Putting together an ordinance or a resolution. We can start looking at this now.
I think that's right too. And to your question about sort of why the series is that we need to understand how best to operate in some of these different landscapes. And so that's
I agree.
Not to you, Mark, yeah, but really understanding like what does that look like, so then we can hold up parallel pathways. So that was sort of the intent when and I shouldn't speak for Commissioner Mirsky, but like that's what we sort of talked about is
Well, I don't want to stop the briefing stuff. I'm just saying, as Bridget has said, is there something we can do in parallel with this? Can we start the CCA process? If not, then I'll kick this ball back to Bridget and say, yeah, I agree with you. Let's do something.
It sounds to me, Jay, and I'll recognize you in a second, that we have at least two possibilities in front of us right now. And to Missy's point, maybe more could emerge, but one is a resolution supporting further investigation of municipalization. I mean, we've heard a lot of voices from the community proposing that. The other thing is that doesn't require any type of legislation, is pursuing this non-exclusive franchise that we could advance that would then lead to, essentially some elements of CCA. And there's potentially others. And what Missy said is exactly right. One of the things that we did want to do is just vote based on the first idea that came out there, in a sense, I'll speak for myself, with a certain amount of ignorance about what the other options are. But certainly to Bridget's point, we don't want to be in a deliberative mode for months and months and months. I'll frankly draw a parallel example. Maybe it's unfair, but President Schlissel announced in 2018 in October that he wanted to have a path to carbon neutrality, and we still don't know what the plan is. And we don't want to burn 3 years to getting to a plan. On the other hand, we do not want to enact a plan that's destined for failure. So we've got both of these. I see Jay had his hand up, and then Bridget also, I think, wanted to comment something again. So go ahead first, Jay.
Yep, and I'll just say, the next steps for getting things done, I think, are truly in the subcommittees. I don't think we're going to get things done at these meetings once a month. I think if people are passionate about individual things, they need to start up subcommittees on their own if they need to. And maybe we need to get a small subcommittee ongoing to look at these different options. But that's where the real work's going to get done. So I think that's where we need to take this information in, and then we need to go out and we need to figure out what we're going to do with it offline from these meetings.
And then bring it back to this group, yep. Right? In an 80% draft form, so to speak. Yep. Bridget, did you want to comment again?
Two things. Which subcommittee would be dealing with this CCA municipality legislation issue? That's one question. And then the other one is that I think Paul then was saying that his recommendation was to move forward on this franchise because that would put pressure. We're not going to get a CCA passed at the state level right now because the two utilities would fight it. But if we can move forward on a franchise, that would put pressure on them. So that's just my second point. I mean,
that was my understanding as well. Mike, did you?
I'm just reflecting back what was said.
Mike, did you want to say something? Go ahead, and then Travis.
I just wanted to support that because I think, to me, the legislative bucket is not something we should spend a lot of time on because Ann Arbor has very, very limited influence. I think it's great if we provide some input and we help direct the city's lobbyists, but let's be realistic here. I would much rather spend our time, like Paul talked about, actually getting to some of the action steps on that. And I would prioritize those pieces. And also, I want to reinforce the point that Paul made. Our best step to actually legislative action is to start taking some action ourselves that puts some pressure on it. So I'm really just trying to reinforce that point that Paul and Bridget made. And I think that's 100% our best strategy and use of time.
In my understanding of what Paul said, and certainly somebody else raise your hand and disagree with this, but anything that he suggested that we do is not something that would run contrary to something that we would want to see in terms of a vision for Ann Arbor, 5, 10 or more years down the road. It's not like we would be laying the groundwork for something that we have to tear up, as I understood. Travis, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Murphy. So I guess I'm hearing kind of a lot of conversations tonight about what next steps are in terms of action items. And I guess maybe this is a question for Missy, or the commission as a whole, as I'm relatively new to this group, as is Commissioner or Councilmember Briggs. I look at the A20 plan that was passed, just last June as a really big action step, and there's a lot of work that has to be done to go into implementing that. And I just pulled it back up to make sure that I was right as well, in that while I think there's a lot of concern and hesitancy around the likelihood of CCA passing through the legislature immediately, the timeline actually doesn't have us expecting CCA to pass until 2025. And so I know that there's urgency, and I certainly am supportive of that urgency. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done for us to accomplish our goals. But I also want to caution us to have faith in the proposal that we put forward as well, and also look to Missy for some guidance in terms of where we can provide the best support in order for our staff to do the work in accomplishing the really detailed and ambitious plan that we put forward. And so this isn't necessarily a call to action for or against any particular proposal, but I also, I think that this commission, of all of the commissions I serve on, is probably the most, I would say, action oriented and really willing to dig into the details and get knee deep in the work. And I really appreciate that about this group, but I also want to remind us as a body that we have enacted a really ambitious plan and have staff working on some of that. And so I don't want us to go too far down a path of necessarily undercutting some of the work that our staff might be doing or distracting them from that work, if we can instead be doing supportive or parallel work at the same time. And so that is not necessarily to discourage any particular course of action, but I just want to caution that as well, because this is a long timeline that we've laid out, and we're not necessarily behind on the goalposts yet. And so obviously we don't want to fall behind, but let's just keep that into perspective as we have the conversation as well.
Missy, do you want to close things out on this topic? Because we've had some offline discussions about this. There's also been some offline discussions with Ann Arbor Public Power and everything like that. And I'm wondering if maybe you might wrap things up in terms of how you would sort of leave us as to how to think about this. And then maybe, so just for everybody else's understanding, Missy, Josh, Carlene, and I meet for a week ahead of time to sort of finalize the agenda and plan out in future agendas. And so, Missy, you want to try to leave us with some food for thought?
Sure. So the 3 commissioners who haven't voted, I'll be in touch with you to get your votes, and then can circulate the voting back. And then I think John, Carlene, and I can kind of work on a schedule. And also, I would say when we get the ideas back, if you have recommendations on speakers, we would welcome that too, because of course we'll be working with third-party people with their time. To the point about this particular space, I'm going to just kind of use the floor very quick to say I really appreciated that framing, Councilmember Rodina, too. We are working at the state level on this legislation. There's legislation that's being introduced to open up choice just for commercial entities, not for residential payers. We are figuring out how we make that play and then build up momentum for residential choice. We really do have a detailed strategy that we are working on, and we're working lots of different levers in this landscape. So it is not all balls in one court that looks like this. It is very adaptive and kind of moving as we see opportunities and fissures that are opening. And one of the things, if people really do want to start getting into this topic, like what Paul was talking about, I have a brain trust of people that we turn to talk and kind of think through, like people in the industry, like Paul, like what would that look like? And so I think if you're interested in getting into those kinds of weeds, doing the work, as Jay said, in that way, that would be a subcommittee where we would kind of dive in and say, like, what does it actually look like to challenge the franchise? And how would we legally do that? And how would we finance that? And where do we pilot it? And what's the data look like? So if that is something that really excites you, that is work that has to happen in a different forum. I don't think that's appropriate for the full body to be taking on. So we are doing that work. Let me just name that. That is our job. And that is what we are doing day in and day out.
My suggestion is that we close this agenda item on that. We do come back at the very end with agenda items for our next meeting, so we'll have a chance to weigh in on this again. But just to keep things moving, the next thing is working group updates. Maybe we can keep those brief. So we have on the agenda really just from the Transportation Electrification Working Group, and then I'll give a very, very brief one on the Environmental Commission. And then if there's anybody else that's got feedback from any of the other working groups, we'll recognize you. Carlene, you want to first give us a brief update on transportation electrification?
Yes, sure. The transportation electrification team has currently been delving into the prioritization of action items that we will be taking on. And that's very much getting into the weeds of the different value outcomes of a dozen or so potential tasks or actions that we'll be actually recommending and taking on moving forward. And that's pretty much where we are right now.
Okay, very briefly from the Environmental Commission, just two really points of interest. We approved a resolution commending Dan Bicknell of CARD and even pre-CARD for all of his work that he's been doing on the dioxane plume, the Gelman plume that's been going on for multiple decades. And the other thing, we had a first reading of a resolution draft that is asking, if it passes, it would ask the city to evaluate the impacts and feasibility of going to every other week trash collection. So, you know, there's been a number of different actions over the years that have allowed us to divert waste from going into landfill, into trash, you know, whether it's the bottle bill or whether it's composting, recycling, if you just take all these things all together. And the question is, are we at a point where potentially we could move to every other week trash collection? Those are the main things that's going on there. There's work being done in the committees, but I don't think it's necessary to go into any additional detail at this time.
John, can I just name that if anyone would like to join at 10 o'clock on Thursday, the Energy Education Subcommittee is going to meet for the first time. And then at noon, the LMI Solar Access Subcommittee is meeting.
Right, and as I mentioned earlier, the concierge services, there's a poll that went out to those who indicated interest. And if someone is now interested in that topic that didn't register that interest before, you could let Missy, Joss, and me know. I'm going to be on that. I think Wayne Appleyard is. So yeah, we're starting to get some of these working groups now really up and going. Public input is next. So this is a repeat, and I'll have to read through this, I guess, but so this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter the meeting ID 913-5783-4502. This information is on the meeting agenda and the video feed. Staff, meaning Missy, will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to raise your hand and to indicate your desire to speak, press *9 on your phone and you will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. Please move to a quiet area and please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Missy, do we have anyone?
We do. We have one caller with digit 327.
Caller 327. You've hung with us this long.
Hello.
There we are. Good. We hear you.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for calling on me. This is Tegwin John. My address is 920 Catherine Street, Ann Arbor, Michigan. I live in Ward 1. Thank you, Paul, for that presentation. I don't know if he's still on. I'm on my phone. The presentation around CCA certainly was illuminating about the history of that idea. I would like to point out that a lot of it was addressed in the second person, seeming to make it extremely easy as though it is a matter of city ordinance. I know this was just touched on a little bit in the conversation. It's not a matter of city ordinance. It is a matter of state law. And if, as Paul suggested, a municipalization effort would be part of a strategy to scare DTE into giving us what we want, then it needs to be an effort that is cohesive and actually effortful. So I would just like to bring that to the attention of the commission, and also to point out the fact that public ownership is not a philosophy or an ideology. It's a value, and it's a value that's deeply rooted in community and in localization and in resilience and in degrowth. And that, you know, this is the Ann Arbor for Public Power is not a bunch of communists. I didn't appreciate the Red Scare there. It is a bunch of citizens who truly believe that taking the power that we provide to our own communities and our neighbors into our hands is something that has value, that includes decarbonization and also includes serving our communities in so many other ways. And I hope that that is the conversation that we can continue to have as we look to the future of how we will be providing power for our community in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And through your attendance and comments tonight, you are definitely part of this conversation. So thanks very much.
Caller ending in 228.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, I'd like to also call in regarding Paul's presentation. I found it rather troubling that he was brought in as an expert on CCA, yet seemed to misunderstand a lot of the fundamental stumbling blocks in the state of Michigan regarding the legal situation here. As has already been touched on enough, it is not a city ordinance. It would require a change in state law. And furthermore, the caps on distributed generation, at least as far as I can understand, and I don't believe that this presentation gave any argument against this, CCA would not inherently remove those. What would remove caps on distributed generation is a municipal utility could choose to raise those caps. I thought that his point on not wanting to buy electrical infrastructure was interesting. I definitely agree that it would be ideal if we were able to bypass the need for investing large amounts of money into old decaying infrastructure. That sounds like a great opportunity that CCA has to benefit municipalization effort, allowing us to share those lines. It also seems like it would probably address a lot of the legal challenges that Valerie brought up. So I definitely fully support CCA as a process, but I do really think it's important for the city to fully and meaningfully move towards municipalization. It sounds like it's going to be an extremely useful tool in allowing us to achieve those carbon reduction targets by allowing us to lift bans on distributed generation or caps on it, while also allowing us to move towards the public ownership model that is a deeply important value and is not something that is just politics or communism, like Paul pointed out, which I also found deeply offensive that that type of rhetoric was being brought into this discussion. I really hope that the city will explore a feasibility study on what would be the best legal way for a municipal utility to provide power to the most amount of residents. That sounds like something that would be within the bounds of a feasibility study to do, and would be extremely useful data to know, so that we aren't guessing or hearing from experts who don't seem to really have the full legal understanding. So thank you for your time, and I hope that we can move forward towards a publicly owned future together.
Thank you very much.
Caller ending in 920.
920.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Limerick. I'm a graduate student here at UM. I live in Ward 3 near Staten Hill. Oh, alrighty. So we can talk in circles for hours about how expensive or difficult or inconvenient establishing a municipal utility might be. We can claim it's just not the right time. Like some previous callers, I echo that the crisis we face is too dire to put all our eggs in one basket. We really need to pursue both TCA and municipalization. I don't view them as at odds at all. But however, we are being really dishonest in this conversation if we do not also discuss in detail the human costs of mismanaging our collective energy future. I also echo the points about public ownership. We need to take back the control of our critical infrastructure. We really cannot abide the shoddy infrastructure of an investor-owned utility whose interests really lie in planning for capacity and selling as much electricity as possible, no matter where it comes from, rather than the resilience and well-being of our community. It just doesn't. I just can't even think about it. It just makes me so angry. DC has made it abundantly clear through their actions that where their values lie. But I want to kind of shift and use my comment and time to kind of speak a little bit further to that human cost. As a native Texan who is really new to Ann Arbor, I moved here just last August. I have a lot of deep ties to many individuals, communities, and organizations that have been directly impacted in Texas and also working on the ground as part of the response. And given this, I really just want to talk to the commission a little bit more about that. We really need to consider that in the Austin area alone, 82 people died of hypothermia, mostly older people in their home. And I'm sorry if I break up a little bit. Largely in their homes alone, and hundreds more were avoided only by the collective community efforts of mutual aid that housed, fed, and kept people warm throughout the whole of this crisis. I want the commission to seriously consider what a similar event might look like here in Ann Arbor. It's really troubling that we're leaving that case, however unlikely it may be, although it's increasingly likely with climate change, that we leave even just a little bit of that chance to have this horrible human cost come. When news broke of this power crisis in Texas, my life here in Michigan came to a halt. I experienced a great deal of anxiety as I checked in on friends, checked in on family, not always able to get in contact immediately. I'll be frank, I come from a privileged background, and my parents and grandmother, they lost
10
power,
seconds.
but never for, I'm just gonna, I'll see the rest of my time. I just please consider the human cost. This is too serious and too severe to think just about money. Thank you.
And we thank you. Is that all, Missy?
That's all, Chair Persky.
Very good. So that leaves us coming back to, as I mentioned, items for the next agenda. Actually, I had made myself a note that I wanted to mention something earlier, and I'm going to insert it right now. And that is, and I think it would be interesting to have, we talked in the potential agenda items of having DTE come and present. It'd be interesting to have their perspective as well. One thing that I noted recently is that the Sierra Club released a study called The Dirty Truth. They evaluated the 50 largest carbon emitting utilities in the United States and looked at their goals versus their their resource plans and scored them on how well their actual plans aligned with their goals. I encourage you to take a look at that. DTE scored 22 out of 100. The average was 17. One of the reasons why the average was so low is because there were a lot of utilities that actually scored 0. The highest, I think, was an 87. So, you know, these things, I think, all enter into the conversation that we're having. And it would be interesting to get DTE's perspective on some of these things as well at some point. So that said, that editorial comment, I'd like to entertain anybody else's input on future agenda items. Obviously, we've got a lot, but is there anything else that people want to see covered? Yes, Mark.
I just like to say, I get DTE's perspective once a month in my mailbox, so I'm not really interested in listening to them come massage us.
Okay. Ember, yes.
I was just going to say the same. I think DTE has a lot of airspace in a lot of places that they shouldn't be, and we don't need to give them more by hearing their perspective here.
I agree. My blood pressure is high enough.
Very good.
Need it. Don't need it.
Okay. So any other comments before we close the meeting?
Got one.
Go ahead. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So I think you asked a while ago, did we need more information on community choice aggregation or anything like that? And it seems like that there were still maybe some questions around from within the commission about the specifics. It feels like there's maybe a little bit more of a conversation to be had there, and maybe specifically how that ties into some of the suggestions that Paul made tonight around that path forward. And so I think having some sort of conversation that helps connect the information that we've heard tonight and takes it to that next step would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And you know, some of the callers pointed out some topics that maybe we want to delve more deeply into. I see hands from both Ember and Mark, but I don't know if those have been taken down or if you had anything to say still.
Oh, I put mine back up. I don't know.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think the Ann Arbor for Public Power group had at one point suggested that they wanted to come back and continue some of the conversation, and there were a lot of questions that people on the commission and the council had asked, and so I think it would be good to give an opportunity to respond to some of the research that was done on those questions, and to come back with a resolution or some of these next steps that we talked about tonight.
Very good. And Mark?
I was just let's say it's basically endorsed what Commissioner Briggs has said. I'd like to add one caveat. I'd be interested in Chuck's input into what questions we should be asking and what things if we're going to look into these areas again and have Paul or the municipal group come back in, what kinds of things we should be asking and how should we be framing and thinking about this issue going forward. So Chuck, if you'd be willing to sort of guide us, because I feel the same way. We need more discussion and probably some more input. And my sense was both of those presentations, they left a lot unsaid. So that's that.
Duly noted. Any other, go ahead, Carlene.
Missy shared with us that OSI is working with experts in this arena, to flesh out all the questions that are, there's all kinds of exploration that's occurring right now. And would we be duplicating their efforts by furthering our exploration of this? Or could we get updates maybe from you, Missy, or a little bit more information from what you are learning and how it applies specifically to Ann Arbor?
yes, on both accounts. I think there's opportunity to go further. Well, what is the saying? You go faster by yourself, you go further together. And the intent is right to go pretty far on this journey. So I think that there's opportunities to elevate any questions that commissioners have as we're having these discussions, and we can come back to the commission for sure. And then if there's like a general consensus that we're wanting to go deeper, further, you know, for example, around municipalization, I'd like to bring in some municipalities that have done it. And I'd like to bring in some municipalities that haven't been successful, so we can also hear their stories. So I'd like to really broaden kind of the conversation. Now we're having that, but I don't know if that's interest to the commission to have. So I think getting your questions will really help us understand, like, when do we need to bring this to the whole commission versus when does a subcommittee really want to kind of like dive into specifics. So that probably was more conflating of the situation, but I think having your questions is really helpful because you're a really educated body. And so if you have those questions, other people have these questions too. So we need to know them.
Any other comments?
I think it's time for a workshop. We need a face-to-face now that COVID's over, right? Or close to it over, getting closer. Maybe we can socialize at 6 foot over at U of M Arena or something and talk about this. This Zoom calls are difficult to really communicate and to move in the right direction. I advocate, I think Bridget mentioned that. It's brought up by Mark. We need to have a path forward that makes sense.
Yeah, we could do that in a working session potentially. I think that's something we need to start planning for. Okay, if there's no further comments, I'll adjourn this meeting. It's 9:23. Thanks everybody for your engagement. And I'd just like to close by encouraging everyone, you know, occasionally, or Missy, is there anything that you want to do in terms of providing us guidance on what constitutes business and the kind of, let's say, discussions and deliberations that we shouldn't be having? I mean, I think it's okay if people suggest topics. I guess the big thing that we don't, well, here, I'll just turn it over to you rather than me.
I will put my council members on alert too for this, because I think you know better. This is kind of a wide statement, a cast amongst all of our commissions. We're tired of Zoom. You know, we're doing things electronically. And so being very careful, like, don't feel singled out. Like, this is a reminder to all of our commissions. We can't do deliberations online. We can't make decisions in that sort of format. And so, you know, if you want to raise a topic for discussion and just let the commission know you're interested, great. But we shouldn't be going back and forth in those discussions and saying like 50% of the commission agrees with this topic. You know, we shouldn't be workshopping resolutions. I'm not saying that we are, but like, those are the kinds of things that would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act, which is why we would take a subcommittee. We would take a smaller group to work on something and then bring it forward. Councilmember Briggs or Radina, do you want to add any additional?
I would just add, you know, as council members, we're told, you know, we get emails obviously that come out to us. We can send things out. There's always, please don't respond. You know, so it's great to share information out and resources and links and different things like that. But just to, as Dr. Schultz said, just avoid the conversational piece of it, even though we're all desperately craving that. And it's an issue in every commission that I'm a part of. There's just this desire to be friendly back and sort of say, oh yeah, and what about this, you know, and then it starts kind of going down a tricky path.
Real quickly, if it's less than a quorum, those kinds of back and forth, are those okay or not? So if there were three people that are carrying on a conversation about an idea via email, or for that matter, in person, that's not a problem, is it?
No, I mean, it's basically the subcommittee structure, right, that we have.
Exactly.
We get in trouble when we have 12 of the 15, you know, on that chain doing that work or co-producing.
Right, if there's an email to the entire commission and it's a back and forth, right?
And similarly, and I think Councilmember Briggs offered something that was helpful and that we try to do as a council whenever we share something out, is just remembering to lead with like, everyone is on this, so please do not respond to all. But also similarly, you can kind of do the subcommittee work. You can get in smaller sub-quorum groups by email. But what you also need to just be wary of is if you, Chair Mirsky, for example, were kind of leading a group of 5 people and then moved on to another group of 5 people, that in itself is also a violation. And so making sure that that work is done sub quorum and that the broader conversation is had at this table.
Great. So let's all hold each other accountable and keep ourselves within the guide rails, and I think we'll be okay. So it is 9:27. I really appreciate the great presentations and the great engagement, including the community engagement that we had. I think all this is certainly advancing our understanding and moving 820 forward. So thanks again for your service as commissioners and as council members. We really appreciate it.